Okay, members, good morning. It's 10 o'clock on this wonderful Monday morning here in Taunton. Thank you for taking the time to come along and join us. For those of you that bothered, thank you. I really do appreciate it. Before we start, just to run through that, unless anyone tells me any different, you can hear me online okay. The agenda packs have been published on ModGov. Can I ask anyone that speaks specifically to some of the papers, particularly the PowerPoint presentations, that they make reference to the pages that they are, so that we can be clear, we can follow it in the room. If I invite people to speak, if you can clearly state who you are for the benefit of anybody listening to the meeting online, that would be appreciated. Do I need to remind you all that the meeting is being audio recorded? Agendas are published electronically. Kindly make reference to the appropriate pages. Just for housekeeping, there are no expected fire alarms, but should this happen, please follow Democratic Service officers as we go. Okay, I'll just...
Andrew or Patsy, are you able to hear us? Could you let us know if you could hear online?
Yeah, we can hear.
Excellent, thank you very much. Before we start today's meeting, I've got just a quick point of reference. I'm sad to say that today is our clerk Fiona Abbott's last meeting with us, clerk in the meeting. For those of you that don't know, Fiona has been an amazing support to me over the time, and she's put up with my little idiosyncrasies and everything, and she's helped the meetings run smoothly. I welcome Aishi, who's taken control over, so thank you for that. But it would be wrong with me if I didn't say thank you to Fiona for her time and support for the committee. I know, and I can say this in a genuine way, without your support over the years, there have been a number of times when things wouldn't have run as smoothly as they have. So I really do appreciate. I'm sorry that you're leaving the council, but I hope that the next part of your life is as fruitful as it deserves to be. So, but thank you. So formally, I'm sure the committee would support me in thanking you for that. I don't know, Jamie, would you like to say something?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I'll just take this opportunity to say thank you very much to Fiona. It was during COVID that we recruited Fiona. There was an unprecedented level of interest in the job at the time. I think we had 120 applications for 2 roles, and Fiona's application jumped off the page to me straight away. She's been an astonishingly good clerk and a huge support to me and to the Chair, and she will be missed hugely. I'm sure Aishi has been trained by the best, so I'm sure she'll be more than able to follow in her footsteps. But yeah, just to say thank you, Fiona, and you will be missed.
Thank you. Okay, then, item number 1 of our agenda, apologies for absence. Jamie.
Thank you, Chair. We have received only formal apologies from Toby Osman, one of our co-operative members. We have one of our co-operative members, Ruth Hobbs, online. I think we were expecting Mary Cox, the other co-operative member. She's unwell, so she is an apology as well. And due to a clash, but obviously we now have senior colleagues just arriving in the room, so that is useful. Aside from that, no other apologies, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that. I'll say it out loud. Obviously, the members of this committee are welcome. With those of you that take the time to come along, it also would be reasonable that we've tried to have apologies in a reasonable way. So what I've done, I've asked our clerk to do a little attendance record, just so that it allow me an opportunity to have a conversation with the group leaders. But what I will ask those members in the room, if you could feed back to your individual groups and your colleagues who should be on the committee. I'm happy that if there are reasons why they can't attend, that's fine. But we have a subbing opportunity within the council, and it's one of the things that's most beneficial. We've got 110 councillors. If we struggle to get a committee in play, the members to attend meetings, then we find opportunities to substitute. I'm happy to spend time talking to members if they're unsure of what the committee holds, but this is an important part. And if I'm banging the vice chair and I are banging the drum of the importance of scrutiny, it would be reasonable, I would suggest, that we try to get a reasonable attendance in the meeting. And it's become constant. And as I say, it's fine. If someone can't attend, then find a substitute. But if you could please communicate back to your individual groups the fact that it would be reasonable for us to do. How can the vice chair and myself try and make the case for scrutiny executive and a full council if we're not having members attend? Francis.
I completely agree, Mr. Chairman. You're absolutely right. It is, as far as I'm concerned, the most important scrutiny committee, and it really has a purpose, and people ought to be interested in it. It would help if it was clear in the agenda what the ask of us is, and I'm not sure that if it feels like, as sometimes it does, that what we're doing is being given information. End of. Then that perhaps makes people feel, oh, well, it's not that important for me to be there. Well, it is important for people to be here, but perhaps there's a bit of that as well.
Thank you. It's one of the points that I've had a conversation with with Jamie, the scrutiny manager, about, particularly when we come to our work agenda, is trying to find a way to get some more decision making there. In the same way, you, for those of you that do attend the executive will know that I have been banging the table somewhat about asking for more opportunities for decision making, or to make the committee feel as if there's some work to be done, because there's a lot of value to be added by scrutiny. Okay, off of soapbox. Moving on, in item 2 of our agenda, declarations for interest. Is there any declarations that aren't already declared? Okay, moving on then. Item 3 of our agenda is minutes from the last meeting, the meeting held the 18th of September. Any points or comments in relation to those minutes? Happy that I signed them as a true record. So moved, thank you. Item 4 of our agenda is public question times. I'm not aware of any, Jamie. No members of the public. Okay, that's fine. So moving on then. Item 5 of our agenda is the Scrutiny Committee's Children and Families Work Programme. Obviously, it's been published that there are items there. One of the points that I was going to say is that the December meeting was looking a bit light. So there were a couple of suggested items which I've put forward, which actually work a little bit through today. So for those of you that aren't, so those observant of you will notice that the audit report makes reference to a local government ombudsman's review. One of the things that I've asked to do is that I've asked the Director of Children's Service if she would ask for a report to be put in place, maybe to bring to the December meeting, that looks at the ombudsman's reports in relation to Somerset items, and perhaps we have a look at those to see where they are and see if there's any relevance. We'll get the idea as we go through. So that's one of the points that I've asked. There are a couple of suggestions for items to have a look at, which have come from officers, supported internships, DOE strategically, and then the role of LCNs. What I've suggested is that at the next officers meeting, where our officers will meet to look at future agenda items, that either myself or the vice chair be invited along, so that we can what I'd like to be able to do is start putting some meat into our future meetings. There's a lot of spaces at the moment, so that we can start getting some items, as Councillor Nicholson has indicated, that we can start looking at and going through some meat on the bone, as it were, some work for the committee. Anyone else, any points or issues in relation to the work programme?
Let's ask a question. It says that on the 15th of the 5th, 2024, we had an update on the DBS check. Is that all complete and finished now? That's all I just wondered. Has everybody had theirs done?
So thank you. So you mentioned DBS check. So just to be a little bit of background for members, so that they were one of the things that the council has taken the decision of, that all councillors will have the minimum DBS check, and there will be enhanced checks for certain other members. When that item was brought to the committee, at the point, I think there was a handful of the 110 councillors that hadn't been completed. But what we can do, I'll ask the scrutiny manager to do a little, just to double check, see where we are, and if necessary, just circulate that between meetings or bring it to us if there are any exemptions to that. Thank you for the question. Councillor.
Hi, can I just ask? I mean, I've had the basic one, and I've had an enhanced check when I was working in a school for most of my life, but I was told I needed one to be on scrutiny, which I haven't had. Is county?
Yeah, so just for clarity, I'm pretty certain that all 110 councillors would have had
I've
a
had a
basic,
one.
and the DBS checks, the enhanced checks are something that we're looking at. So thank you for making the point. What we'll do again, I'll get that cross-referenced, because I think I'm reasonably certain that this committee would be one of the ones that require an enhanced.
Well, I was
DBS.
told that was the case, but nobody's contacted.
That's
me
fine.
to do
Thank
it.
you for
Yeah.
making the point. We'll take that up, and we'll take that as an action to go through. Any other points or work items? Just before we close this one, then I'll say it out loud so that members and officers are our eyes and ears. And the council is so big these days that it's very hard for us to know what items. So the chair, vice chair and myself would always be interested to have recommendations for items that they think we may need to look at as a committee, because it would help build our work programme and also build the involvement of members. I want members to feel as if they're involved in this committee, so that we can do things in a structure and do some good work for the council and for the young people that work. Someone's joined with the microphone. Martin.
No, it's not me. Oh, it is me. Sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, so like that was that. So work programme, any other points or items? No. Okay, then item 6 of our agenda is our budget review. I'm not sure, I'm sorry to jump straight onto you. Heather, do you want to introduce it, or are you happy for Christian to carry on? Chris. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everybody. So my name's Chris Evans. I'm Head of Finance Business Partnering, and I have with me Joe Curry, who's Finance Service Manager. So we do have some slides for the month 5 budget monitoring forecast. So you can see on the table there, there is predicted £7.5 million predicted overspend for 24-25. Sorry, on the bottom right-hand corner, you should see there's an increase from month 4 of £1.1 million. The majority of it is around placements, as it has been reported previously. There has been a change in some of the placement types, which are the more expensive placement types, which include residential and unregistered. There is some additional costs for permanent increase in kinship costs, where people look after the child who aren't the parent, and some increase in some costs on SEND, local government ombudsman fines, and some mediation costs. To break that down a little bit further, to the placements, which is the majority of the overspend, you can see on the table there. Hopefully it's a bit small, but you could be able to see that it's predicted £10.384 million overspend overall in external placements. The main of the overspend is for residential placements, which is £4.5 million, but we're also not receiving as much income as we budgeted for from the dedicated schools grant, and also some of the NHS income. And that's the categorisation of what we receive support for. That takes it up to about £6.3 million predicted overspend. And then we've got unregistered placements. There's a £2.6 million gross overspend predicted in that area. So on the next slide, we'll break that down even to a little bit further. So you'll see on the left-hand side, the bar chart graph, looking at a budgeted residential placements of 73 for 24-25. It's currently around about the 93 mark. It is reducing. As you can see, it peaked in June, around 100 placements. It's come down to about 93 as of the end of August. And then on the unregistered placements, we did budget for 1 child on average through the year. We are up to about 5, and we were predicting 4 at month 4. So again, obviously the reason for the increased costs in placements. Looking at overall children looked after numbers, so it has increased by 30 over the last 12 months. So we're looking at just under 600. It has reduced, but it's still just under 600 overall, as you can see from the rising graph there. Moving on to education transport for 24-25. So you can see there the budget of 32.4 million. We are forecasting around 33.1 million. This is a £700,000 predicted overspend. That is a movement of 300,000 from the previous month. The main of that I kind of previously mentioned, which the local government ombudsman fines and mediation costs, and that's mainly due to a lot more challenges from the educational health care plans. And then finally, the high needs block element of the dedicated school grant. There's a lot of figures in there. We budgeted for 5,144 pupils on the left-hand side there. So the budget we predicted, the deficit is 18.853 million. As of month 5, we are looking at a predicted overspend of 26.362 million. Obviously, a considerable increase. We did budget for 415 children in the independent non-main school placements. The forecast is up to 554, as you probably see on the right-hand side. And there are some increased numbers of mainstream top-ups and costed plans. So yeah, considerable increase. We are predicting at the end of March 25, the high needs block element to be around £61.8 million in deficit. So a considerable figure there. So there's a whistle-stop tour of the budget monitoring performance. And there's some acronyms in the final slide, because there is a lot of acronyms in children. So we've added them on from feedback from previous meetings. So hopefully that helps a little bit. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you for the acronyms. It's really helpful because while members look to questions, just a couple of points. So our last question for me. So the CLA numbers, it's not a question for you, Christian, but just we seem to have peaked and we have a downward trend. Whether Heather or Claire were is that likely is that trend looking positive, and is it likely to continue, or is that the £24,000 million question?
I think that might be the $24,000 question, but I don't know whether Claire's got an answer for it. Certainly, we have noticed that it has gone down, but then all it would take would be a sibling group to come in, or a couple of sibling groups to come into care, and it would actually change it again. But I don't know if Claire wants to say anything more about it, what she's anticipating going forward, and what modelling might have been done.
Okay, so yeah, currently, so today there are 602 children in care, so it's come down a little bit more. Why we think that's coming down is because of cohorts. So in August, we had a larger than normal cohort of children turn 18. So it's not really impacting on the groups of children that might be able to leave the care system, if you like, I suppose. The cohort that is our most concerning one is the 10 to 15-year-old age group, where we still have children coming into that age group, and that age group of children tend not to leave care. They tend to stay until they hit 18 and to be the highest cost age group. We will have another group in January. A larger than normal group will also hit 18, because asylum seeking children, when they don't know their own date of birth, which quite often they don't culturally, are usually given the date of birth by the Home Office for the 1st of January. So a lot of young people 18 all in one go in January, and our cohort has obviously increased slightly. So we have more young people who are going to hit that 18 in January. So it will bring the numbers down overall, which is great. But in terms of the cost issue, it doesn't really impact hugely on that cost issue, because our numbers in that 10 to 15 age group, which is the biggest concern, are not reducing.
Thank you. Francis, Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just on, I've got a number of questions. Do I do them all, or do I? Right, okay. The first one on the children looked after numbers. This is a finance paper, not a children paper. But the impact of the numbers changing isn't the impact on the finances for the reasons that you've given us. Would it be useful? And this is a question with no, it's neither num nor nolly. It's not expecting either answer. to have, instead of total numbers, how many have come in the age ranges? I don't know, in the time, rather than, so that we wouldn't be seeing the impact of the turn 18. That just, is it a rising number of children coming into care? And at what age, rather than total numbers, or a falling number of children coming into care? I don't know. And because not all children go out of care because they become 18, because we hope that they will leave care for a lot of other good reasons. So that's the first one. I don't know whether there's anything you want to say about that.
We can do that very easily. We can tell you month on month the number of children coming in and going out and the age groups that they're in. Obviously, when we have more children going out than coming in, that helps us a lot.
Yeah.
And we have had, so in terms of children leaving care, which month is this? So June, there were more children leaving care than came in. July, it was equal. August, there were more left than came in. But then in September, we had far more, 10 more come in than left. So it starts to tip the balance the other way. At the moment, October is balanced. So that's okay, but we could certainly do that. We could provide you with the age groups of those children coming in and leaving. That's not
Could I leave it to you and the chairman to decide whether that would be useful? It's merely a suggestion from me. Okay, next one, and a little bit of jumping around. The high needs block. We've got INMS and pre-16 budgeted pupils 508. But INMS placements is budget of 415 and forecast of 454. I'm not quite sure I understand what that's all about. Why we've got different numbers in those places. And I'm not sure that they were the numbers that I heard.
Yeah, I think you read 554 rather than 454, but that's just, yeah. So the difference between the budget 415 and the 508 is, I think, 93 children looked after who have educational provision.
Yeah.
So we have 93 children within children's social care that are also receiving education. So that makes it up to the 508.
And are they at independent non-maintained special schools?
A variety of settings.
Right. Okay. So I don't think I'm really any the wiser at all, and I don't know whether that's me being not very bright this morning, or whether it is confusing.
My interpretation would be what we're saying is that budget line contains both INMS and residential.
Right. Okay.
So the
okay.
INMS specific pupils are your 415 budget out of the 508, but there is a remainder who are not in INMS. They're in residential provision.
Right. I wonder whether it might be simpler for to have those two lines separated, but that's
it's a helpful.
Yeah.
Sorry, let me just come in there. So I'm just conscious. I just about understand it, which means there'll be colleagues around the table that have no idea what we're talking about. So what it might be worth doing, I'm happy if it just an explanation paper, or so it doesn't necessarily have to be an item for this agenda, but something could be put together, an explanation of what we just said, the difference between independent, non-maintained, and obviously residential, and how that sits with the numbers might be useful. Would that be achievable?
Can I go into another one? Sorry.
I was just going to say that one of the things that might be useful generally is just unpacking what each of these lines do, because they are in a very different place. Some of them are very stable, some of them are very unstable. So we're very happy to do an information paper that explains the dynamics around the budget. Yeah.
That would. Thank you. Can I do the next one? We know that that there have been delays to Homes and Horizons, which impact on education and placements. And we know that there is, I don't know that it's in place yet, but there is the intention that the children's budget should fund a planner to enable the delays in other parts of the council to be addressed. Two things. How many children are held up in this delay of moving to Homes and Horizons, one, and two, if and when the planner is in place, how are we going to make sure, I went to a planning briefing for developers and also councillors a week or so ago, where we were told that all planners would work on all cases. How are we going to make sure that the children's money is spent on the right thing, i.e. on children?
So just for clarity, I think, so I'll forgive me if I'm getting it wrong. So one of the things that we discussed previous meetings was the fact that there were some blockages which are potentially impacting some of our additional placements. And there was a conversation that had that the children's services budget, some of the children's services budget was being used to try and free up things. So you're just talking some clarification around that point. Whom?
So in relation to the planner, permission has been given for that planner to be appointed, and planning are looking for somebody to take that role on an interim basis. Interestingly, they have managed to prioritise the critical issues for Homes and Horizons over the last 3 or 4 weeks, so they have now been sorted. We have a couple more to be resolved, which this new person will be focusing on. I'm confident that that planner will be just used to prioritise children's services work. If there's additional capacity, I'm happy for them to use it as they need to in terms of the council work. There are only a couple more significant decisions over the next month or two. Then there is a lot of work to be done around the children with disabilities residential provision that needs to come forward. So there'll be a lot of work for them to do in preparation. So I'm not worried that that will not be used appropriately, which I think is fine. In terms of Homes and Horizons capacity, we have now, as we said, opened homes 6 and 7, and we have got one child of those 2 homes. Just looking at the capacity of the 7 homes that are now open, we have got 9 beds that are not filled by anybody in those homes that are now open. So the homes 6 and 7 could take 2 children, so 1 in each on top of the children they've currently got. But because of the complexity of those children's needs and the fact that they've only just moved in the last 2 or 3 weeks, they have to have quite a significant settling period to make it possible to actually plan for other children to move in. We have got plans to move other children into the other, 7 beds, at least 5 of those other 7 beds over the next few months. We have one young person, I won't go into details about, who needs to move to adult provision, and that's has some complexity to it, and that has to be blocking 2 beds until that young person can move. But we need to do the right thing for them to move on into the future. So I'm comfortable that the work that is being done around those beds is right in terms of young people having the right support and being matched appropriately to have a sensible home for that young person. We also have the annexes and the pods that need to move, so we have now got the permissions for those. There are some technical issues that I don't understand around cranes and building sites. Yeah, so that's exactly. That means that they will be moving, but not quite yet in the next month or 2. That will give us capacity to move children out of crisis provision. So that at the moment is children being placed with agencies as unregistered provision because we have nowhere else for them to go. Which will be a really good stepping stone. It is a registered provision as the annex, be a good stepping stone into finding the right Homes and Horizons placement for them.
Still not on. Got it now. And I'm sorry, probably I wasn't listening carefully enough. I can see the home to school transport is actually underspending, which is amazing, and send transports forecasts to meet budget, which is great. But I was thinking this education chunk, which is forecasting to have an overspend, is about transport because it's in the transport. So is it not transport? Is it something else? Or is it transport?
So I'm
Sorry, is
you
this
make reference
slide
to the
page 32?
On 32, up 1.
Is that anything, is that actually not anything to do with transport?
First line education is just the education element of budget, I believe.
Oh, right, so this is ombudsman fines.
They,
No, not really.
no, the education budget was overspent going into, so it wasn't, we didn't set a balanced budget in education this year.
Right,
So it was already overspent going into the year, but it has increased between month 4 and month 5, but we're anticipating some better picture going into month 6. That we've carried that forward from the start of the year, that discrepancy in education.
right, okay, and it's within the plans to work out how to deal with it.
So absolutely, you know, we are about to embark on a large scale reorganization because we need to have an affordable establishment. And we started the year with less money than folk to pay for.
Okay, forgive me, just on that point then, are we saying, so if I'm right, in my understanding, the forecast overspend for education, you're saying that was last year's money that's been carried over?
So we started this financial year with a gap between income and expenditure of £1.6 million. So that is a reduction from our starting point at the start of the year. So we've clawed back some of that gap through good management. But the disparity, we didn't have a balanced budget. It was £1.6 million adrift when we set the budget in April. And so we're trying in year to close that gap. But as we said, we will need to reorganise to bring us to a sustainable position.
Okay, thank you. I've got a few councillors now, so Evie, please. Oh, Marcus, sorry, Councillor Kravis.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry, I don't know if it's relevant now to this item, but we talked a lot about care leavers at 18, and off my mind's like, what happens then? Well, of course, then you have supported young persons then, don't you? So, okay. And then I started thinking, but what, you could still be in full-time education at 18, so you could be, and then what happens if technically you would be in care if a situation that happened at 17, but now you're 18, you can full-time education. Then my head started bouncing around, and then I ended up thinking, you mentioned asylum seekers, all their birthdays all being the 1st of January, and I thought, and then they would have no family support, so they could, and I just wondered what happened if you just happened to be the wrong side of your 18th birthday, and probably, yeah, and then I've gone on to all sorts of things. So you could be an asylum seeker and 18 in full-time education, technically you could have no support whatsoever with that, or is there any support out there? That's where I'm coming from, I think. Still working through my head, but anyway.
Claire.
So any young person who is in our care at 17, when they hit 18, we don't suddenly kick them out. So we would ensure that they had the right support and the right accommodation. So the Thrive 16 Plus, which is a semi-independence provision, a lot of young people as they approach 18 would be in that Thrive 16 Plus accommodation, and they would be there being supported at semi-independence accommodation. So there were staff there supporting them until they got social housing tenancy effectively. At the moment, that can be up to 25 because it's such a backlog. So the local authority for children who are in care and care leavers has an accommodation duty to support accommodation until they're 21, if that's what's needed. And we have a support, advice and guidance duty till 25 for most of them. There's a slight technicality around issues, but we do support ours in the main till they're 25. And we have just developed a post-25 offer on the basis that a lot of care leavers really struggle. They've had a difficult start in life and they're not as independent as you would expect maybe your children to be at sort of 18 to 25. So yes, I think our support offer is good, and we definitely don't just drop people on their 18th birthday.
I think my question was, what if my question was actually more, if they're not in our system at 18 and would have been in our system if they 17, but something occurs when they could be you could be 18 and still have another 9 months of full-time education in hand. And then what happens to, how black and white is that? And where do we step in? And then that's why I was talking about the asylum seekers as well, because they could be 18 and suddenly find themselves in a situation. Of course, they're not getting the support that others would have done if they'd been care leavers. And how does that work, or what can we do, or what do we need to be doing?
So any asylum seeker who comes into this country under 18 automatically comes into the care of the local authority. So they become a child in care, and therefore for the vast majority of them would achieve leaving care entitlements. So they would get the same support as any other child who's been in our care, and get the same accommodation support, the same advice and guidance support as any other young person. So they're no different. The fact they're an asylum seeking child doesn't make any difference to them. They're still a child in care with all the same entitlements and rights and support.
The question was, what if they're with a family when they come in at 18 and everything's hunky-dory, and then suddenly it's not hunky-dory, and they've come in with a family at 17 or 16, and then when they just turn 18, something happens, and they're not, are they already in our care, even if they're with a family? Am I going on to a different subject? I don't quite know.
I would suggest that you've reached one of the most complex analyses possible. So in theory, it becomes complicated. I'm trying to answer you assimilate the question. If and is it relevant? I think only to asylum-seeking children. So if someone was to become to the attention of the council over the age of 18, the first thing that would happen would be that adult services would take over and assess that. If there was a need, then because they wouldn't be in education if they've only come into only just arrived, or so. Yeah, so it's a complicated answer. I think if you look at the flow chart of how we get it starts going in different ways. So when you bring into the fact that the new arrivals to this country, it makes it more complicated. And I'm just trying to, there isn't an easy answer to.
I'm not sure I'm quite understanding what you're asking, Councillor Travis, but I suppose if you're asking if a child is living in a foster family before they're 18, then actually we have a system called staying put, which means that a child can stay with their foster family post 18, and the foster family is financially supported to enable that if they want to do that. If an asylum seeking child was living with their own family and they were all asylum seeking, and then at 18, for some reason, they had to leave home, they would be in the same position as any other young person who had to leave home at 18 because they're no longer a child in law. So they would become homeless, like any other young person, go through the adults homelessness.
I think that probably is where I was coming from, is that, that definition of 18 and then young persons. And so that definition of 18, and as I said, you could be 18 and an adult, but you could technically have 9 months full-time education and be with, you could be in the last year of college, couldn't you? So
I think to make it a little bit easier to take it outside this meeting, if you put your mind to it and you can drill down to the detail, then email me or the director Jose will find you an answer that meets it. You managed to pick a complicated one for a Monday morning.
Yeah, it does seem like a Monday morning.
Thank you. Okay, I've got I'll go to Ruth online.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of quick questions from me. One, I think Francis has probably managed to get the answer to, but I just want to be 100%. So on the slide that discusses the transport that's also got educationing, that 0.3 million additional LGO fines and mediation costs are related to education budget, not to transport budget. Can I just clarify that?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. And my second one is, the presentation was great, but you threw out a number around how much we are overspent on the high needs funding block. And we are very conscious that we have discussed as a committee beforehand that at some point that money potentially has to be paid back. I think it's 2026. Can you just clarify what the figure was that you said we are predicted at the moment to be overspent on high needs?
Sorry, did you mean now or in 2026?
The figure that was given today, which I'm presuming was for now.
Yeah, as at the 31st of March 25, the current prediction is £61.78 million deficit. That's
Thank
the
you.
end
And
of-
my understanding is that is currently sat on the spreadsheets, but isn't in effect because we haven't actually got to pay it back. But at some point, potentially, the government could request that money back.
Yes, the statutory override is due to end in March 2026. At that point, the money technically would be due back. Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ruth. Okay, two more then. So Simon, Councillor Caswell.
Carswell, not Caswell. You can call me Simon, it's all right. Just a question on the figures, really. The cohort of children looked after can go up and down, but as you said, it can go up and down because as children reach 18 and there might be a tranche. So would it be useful to have figures as a percentage of the total child population? I know that will be a small percentage, but would that help understand? Because the cohort may be going up, or sorry, the cohort may be going down, but this percentage of children may be going up. That was just one question. And also, I didn't know if we have figures relating to, this may be completely wrong, but when more exclusions and EHCPs and things like that come from academies and state maintained schools, or the other way around, or that sort of thing.
The first one I might be able to help out with. So the question in relation to children looked after, that might be a corporate parent board question as opposed to, because one of the things we do at the CPB is drill down actually into the children looked after. So rather than generate work, what I'll suggest is perhaps we try and figure out if that information is available through the corporate parent board papers, then we could share those with committees so that we can look at the breakdown. Because I'm just conscious as well, we're starting to get into operational and the difference there. So if the papers are already available with the corporate parent board, then I'll get those shared, which shows the breakdown of the CLA numbers, the ages, etc. Thank you. The other second part of the question, could you just remind us again?
I mean, it's just wondering whether we have any figures on the difference between exclusions, EHCPs, that sort of thing, between academies and state maintained schools.
To answer that question, yes, we could do that. But when you look at exclusion figures, the vast majority are in secondary schools, which I think you would expect, and all but 2 and soon to be 1 secondary schools are academies.
Thank you.
What I would say, though, is that they're not evenly distributed across the sector, and they're a relatively small proportion of schools account for the overwhelming majority of exclusions and suspensions. So I think, well, wouldn't want to be naming names. I think we could look at just illustrating that disparity so you can see the wide variation in performance.
It was something that a previous committee, this committee previously looked at, is the exclusion rates and where it is, and we did a deep dive. So that well, don't want to put any ideas into people's heads, but that may be something that you may want to, as a committee, us to look at a little bit more to drill down into at some point. You okay with that? Thank you. Martin, Councillor Lovell.
Thank you, Chair. I just wonder if we could have an update on the number of back to children looking after. How many children are currently in out of county placements? Just at this moment. Thank you.
Okay, but that's a corporate parent board question. I'm just conscious one of the things that we have. Is that relevant to this committee, or is that a corporate parent board?
I'm happy to provide it to this committee. I think if it's about finance in terms of an assumption that out of county placements cost more than local placements, that's not necessarily the case. So if it's more about children being further away from home and that being a poor outcome for them, which I would agree, that probably is a corporate parenting board.
Background to the question, Chair, is the fact that obviously that is a high area spend. That the fact that it's out of county is a financial concern.
No, it's a valid point. Okay, so executive decision. I'll suggest that perhaps a consideration, Christian, is that we maybe look at the breakdown of placements and impact of external of outside of county placements in relation to I know that that information is available through the Couple Parent Board, so we might want to synchronise the two bits there that we've asked for. So the breakdown of ages in relation to CLA, and then costs of CLA outside of county, and whether that's an impact on costs. Just a piece in relation to that. Claire, you're looking worried at me. Tell me. Yeah, so Martin, we'll get that back for you if that's okay, and same for Simon. So thank you for that.
Well, I can attend tomorrow. So if it's on the agenda for tomorrow, the Corporate Parent Board, I'll be attending. So probably online.
We'll pick that up if it's because I think I'm chairing that as well tomorrow. Okay. Item 6 then. Any other points or questions? No. Thank you very much, Christian. Thank you, Joe. So we'll look to move on from that one onto item 7 of our agenda, which is funding provision for children with additional needs. Feedback on the consultation. Amelia.
Thank you. So this is the last day of the consultation. It closes at the end of play today, and this consultation has been running since the 9th of September. We've obviously just had the finance item, and this consultation is about money, and it is specifically about money being spent from the high needs block. Skip to just click through that, please. So for any of you who have a post bag, you will know that there is a high level of concern about provision for children with SEND in the county. And I'd be surprised if you have never been contacted with a constituent's concerns. Children's needs are not being met as quickly as anyone would want. Some of the arrangements that are being put in place, including those at very high cost, are not having the impact that would be wanted. And we know, as we have just seen, that the budget is under enormous pressure. And Christian has just given you the figure of what we're anticipating to be the accumulated deficit as of the 31st of March. But we have a forecast as part of the Dedicated Schools Grant Management Plan, deficit. We can decide what the D stands for, deficit, DSG, but the plan to deal with the deficit. And that forecast says that based on things that are currently known, if nothing changes, anticipation is that it will reach £290 million deficit by 29-30. That is an absolutely staggering sum, but those trajectories are mirrored across every local authority in the country, and a huge amount of research has recently been done on this. The increase generally in children with SEND across the country is in the region of between 130 and 140% across every area. This isn't just an issue for the UK, and the ISOS survey demonstrated that we've had a 40% increase in identified SEND. In France, it's 34%, Germany 18%, Italy the same. So this is a global issue in terms of the very rapid, large-scale identification of SEND compared to the past. So this consultation is about money. Not just because we're overspent, but because there's widespread perception that the money is not being spent as well as it could be in a context where we have very little control. But it seems to everyone perverse that we are spending ever more money, and outcomes appear in many cases to be either not improving or in decline. Next slide. One of the things I think is important for this committee to be aware, oh, sorry, which side are we on? That's just the process we've been through, formal consultation, just to be aware we've done a huge amount of external engagement. And I've met personally online with most of the head teachers in the county. We have briefed parents. We've had some fantastic engagement from parents, and thanks to Ruth, who's online, for the support of her organisation and the Parent Care Forum for that. We have also met with Senkos, and a full consultation report is in production. I can tell you, though, and we'll summarise at the end, that there is very, very widespread support for these proposals. The business case is due to be submitted to the executive for discussion on the 4th of November at full exec. Next slide. For this committee, one of the things I think is really important for people to be aware of is that the consequences when children struggle in their mainstream school are widespread and they can be very severe. If you just look at the slide, we've already discussed suspension exclusion. If you're aware that we are second and third respectively in the latest data in terms of the proportion of children being suspended and excluded, if they have SEND. If they do not have SEND, we are not particularly high. Interestingly as well, for those who are excluded and we have not identified SEND, by the time they get to the pupil referral unit or they encounter someone with the ability to assess, quite often we're identifying that they have an identified need. So our suspension and exclusion problem is a SEND problem. And our ability to meet their needs. Placements are breaking down in all forms of school. We have lots of placement breakdowns in mainstream. It's not the only place they're breaking down. They are breaking down in special schools. They're breaking down in very, very high cost independent schools, and independent schools are handing children back to us. Some of our placements are extremely expensive. The average cost of an INMS is around £65,000 a year, but it can go up to over £100,000 a year, adding transport. That can be in the region of £150,000 to £160,000 a year, bearing in mind that the average cost for a child in a Somerset school is less than £5,000. If they go into residential, then you're in the region of about £300,000 a year. We've had a 22% increase in pupils who are severely absent from school over a 2-year period. We have no data on this, but economic development colleagues are looking at this. We have 60,000 adults who are not economically active. Everyone I know that I have spoken to is aware of someone whose employment has been affected by their child being unable to attend school. It's very likely that we have a significant number of parents in that group who are not able to work because their child is not regularly in school. We say children taken into care, they're taken into care because parents come to us and say, I can no longer cope. Please take my child into care. And we've also had schools judged inadequate, where the school has effectively come to pieces because of their inability to manage in the classroom. We put all of those together. This is crisis level impacts. Every single one of these is of acute concern in the county. So the ability of mainstream schools to cope is what this consultation is about. Next slide. The top line proposal is about equivalent funding if a child goes to a mainstream school or a special school. At the moment, if a child goes to a mainstream school, they will receive in the region of about a third as much funding as if they go to a special school. Now that third is not because that child has lower level of need, because the third is based on the same education healthcare plan. The plan does not change if the child changes schools, but the money does. And so the proposal is to say if the child's needs are the same, the provision must be the same, and therefore the funding should be the same. You skip to the next slide. Just see how that works. This is a government formula. There's 3 elements set by the government, elements 1, 2, and 3. Element 1 is just the money that any child will get in a school. Element 2 is something called notional send. And if we had much longer in our time slot, I would go into that, but I won't. That's just money that the school allocates. The rest is given by the local authority. And you can see column special top up versus, second column versus third, where it says mainstream. You can see the sums there about roughly 1/3. In a mainstream school. We are required to fund the HCP. So when a school comes to us, we've got something called a costed plan that is a top up on top of the top up. And so when we've looked at the costed plans that we've been allocating, which is a micro analysis of what is in the HCP and a price tag attached to it, somewhat unsurprisingly, it has come out as being basically what we give special schools as default. And so the proposal is, rather than use an enormous amount, and if you speak to schools, they will ratify this, it is an enormous amount of time being spent by schools and by my team that we simply give them the money up front. Because actually when they come to us and say, you haven't funded this EHCP, the numbers are telling us that that is correct. Next slide. However, as we just discussed, the budget is very, very overspent. You'll just need to click through this one. So the words appear, yeah. To make this change overnight would cost £10.3 million. So the proposal is that we would phase this over time, and there are 4 groups that of pupils that we've identified, so that we could phase this in, including if they have a costed plan, if they are getting a new HCP, etc. Next slide. Members of this committee will recognise that not everything in this world is about money, and if we give you the money but there is nothing to buy, then you are no better off. And so proposal 4 is a model of provision. And this model provision is about changing how we think about children with SEND and changing how we organise ourselves within the system. It's about reorganising what we already have. It's about doing more with what already exists, as well as putting some new things in place. You skip to the next slide. So this includes 7 principles, which are about how we think differently. It's about understanding that every child has the potential to be in mainstream. There is no such thing as a special school child and a mainstream school child. We've seen children with the most profound disabilities succeed in mainstream, but there are times when special schools are the right thing for that child. But it's about a situation, it's not about something specific to that child. We have thousands of children in this county who are not on the roll of any school. And so the principle is that we would wish to move, and it might take a long time, but move to a place where every child was on roll. Now there's some discussions that we might have about different groups of children in that space, but thinking about what that would involve. And there's a mindset about our approach to crisis, which is every crisis seems to take us by surprise. And actually we should be able to leap into action and be very agile. There's a few other things there. I won't dwell on. I'm happy to come back to them if any of them would you would like to discuss in more detail. But about thinking about things like relationship-based support, having full-time supervision so that parents can work, stretching that curriculum both up the age range and down, and giving access to children with SEND to out-of-school hours and the extracurricular offer. Next slide. This is how we've kind of illustrated this idea. All of the things here already exist in some form, but they are not well coordinated. If you can just click to the first one. The first element of this we called stage 0 because it's not really a stage, but if it's not part of your model, you won't move on for some children. We have children who are in their bedrooms. They cannot get dressed, they cannot get out of bed, they cannot face the day. And someone needs to be there, a professional who can help them face the world again. Otherwise, they're not going to be able to engage with learning. Next slide. Then the first proper side is at home. Some children aren't ready to leave the home, or they're not ready to learn with other children. That shouldn't be a long period of time. Let me tell you, we have children who have been at home for years. So it's about doing that intensively with people who know what they're doing and getting them prepared for stage 2, which is that small group space. We have lots of these. It might be called AP, it might be called a special school, it might be called a pupil referral unit. But it's about having a common approach that says you are with a smaller group of peers. It is a more flexible environment, but potentially that will be a transitionary space where you're moving on to mainstream. Not for all children, sometimes they will stay there. But in order to move on to that mainstream space, there needs to be an intermediate place, because actually this, if talk to a pupil referral unit, the step from a pupil referral unit into a mainstream classroom, they say that child needs to be able to sit for an hour in a history lesson. Yes, they do. Are they ready for that? No, they are not. So there needs to be something in between, a stepping stone to get them from A to B. And we have some of these already. They're called enhanced learning provisions. Some of them are bases, some of them are units. We need more standardization and a clear understanding of what that looks like and how it's funded. But the proposal is that would be part of the model, so that a far, far greater proportion of children could get to the final stage, which is stage 4, which is your mainstream classroom, which we believe every child has the potential to achieve, even if that doesn't come to fruition. Next slide. We've touched on suspension and exclusion already. One of the things that head teachers have told us is that they feel that the incentives are for them to exclude and the disincentives are for them to keep the child. That is clearly wrong. It runs against their moral purpose, but they have to push water uphill sometimes to keep children in their school. And so, while we can't change everything about the incentives and disincentives, including the accountability system, there are things that we can and could change, and that's the proposal. And so the kinds of things we're talking about here include money. Having short-term emergency funding, but also about us organising ourselves so they know who to come to in the local authority, about wrapping around a school when they're taking a child and that being a much more relational support so that they feel held through that process of a child from challenging circumstances landing successfully in that school, but also us being much clearer about what a compliant exclusion entails. And when we've spoken to head teachers, we've been very clear, and they have appreciated this, that we don't think there is a scenario where there'll be no exclusions in this county, but that we need to be much clearer about what non-compliance means. And that if an exclusion is not compliant, then there will be consequences to that, and that there will be disincentives, that we will ask for money back, that we will share information with Ofsted, that we will have a much more mechanistic approach to allocating children where there's no school is coming forward, and that will be taken up by an independent group, not by head teachers. But I have to say, I have met with, been in every part of the county talking about this with head teachers, and so far no one has indicated that they think that is inappropriate or unfair, and there has been support for it. Okay, so the consultation closes the end of today. We've had 290 responses so far. You can see that the majority of those are from parents, carers, but a significant number from schools. We have 88 responses from schools, but a number of them from trusts. So we're considering that that represents all the schools in that trust. And we have asked a specific question about fairness because we're proposing to phase this in, so different children would be affected differently. We thought it was very important to be explicit. We needed people to say whether they thought these were fair. We're also obviously including proposals around disincentives, but you can see there the overwhelming majority saying yes, that they think they are fair to schools, children, and to families. Final slide. And that's the responses to each of the proposals. The proposal 1 and proposal 6 are the funding specific ones. And they say very, very strong support. So your dark blue there is strongly agree for equivalent funding and for short-term emergency and interim funding, but support across every single proposal in that response. Now, I would say this is from a financial point of view, this is a very, very difficult area to predict. But I think our view is that we don't, we are not clever enough to model every single scenario. We're talking about thousands of different decisions and complex situations. But when parents and schools say that they think this will make a difference, I am inclined to believe them because they're the ones who are wrestling with these crises on the ground every day. And certainly all of our interactions, I've had no one saying, oh, you know, we think you should pour in good money after bad. And there's a strong view that we are wasting money and that the money could be better spent. And I think that's reflected in the responses. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Amelia. So just for clarity, you'll bring the proposal to this committee to look at and review and to comment with a view to, so what next with it, please?
Yes, thank you. So we're bringing this for Scrutiny's view to inform the executive paper. It's going to the executive on the 4th of November, and we want to reflect Scrutiny's comments, reflections, and challenge in that paper.
So, and just for, and I'll speak for the committee before they tell me, obviously this is a very complex thing that we're putting forward, and the ability for us to, because some of us will have more experience over it than others. So the question I suppose I'm asking is, so what we need to feed into any comments, initial comments that we have ready to go, but into executive. But the first question for me, if this is as well supported as it seems to be with the consultation feedback, is this a new model? Is it being done around the country? I suppose is Somerset inventing the wheel again?
So as I indicated, this is not just a national problem, but a global a global challenge. I would say that we are at the very edge of what we know as a society about how to respond to something which is entirely new. So that my reflection is that what we have seen globally, and it's as good news for children, there has been a very rapid destigmatization of neurodiversity. That is a good thing for our society, but what it has done is has taken away a barrier for people coming forward and saying, I'm different and I need help. And that has resulted in this explosion in identification of SEND. That's my personal interpretation, but I think the facts bear it out. That will be a good thing for our children in the long run, but it's putting huge pressure on systems which were relied on effectively, we didn't realize it at the time, but relied on stigma to control cost, with stigma being released. So what I would say is, that's a long-winded way of saying there are no established answers to this. We are not aware of any local authority in the country that has yet successfully stemmed the growth in expenditure. The safety valve attempted to do that. We're aware that locally, anecdotally, areas who put forward plans, that those plans had failed to deliver within a matter of months. So we're not, effectively, we're on the edge of what anyone knows how to deal with.
I'm just thinking, just to put it into some context. So in effect, we're playing catch up here. In the fact, so one of the things that's become clear is the fact that our identification of children with additional needs through our education, health, and care plans is deficient in a way, and this is the catch up bit. So we're being inundated with applications from young people and parents with who identify issues, and it's how we play catch up. And I've confused myself there. Apologies. So this is the plan to try and address those needs. I've answered my own question, so I'll pause there, but till it comes back to me. Jenny, did you want to come in?
Got a point and a question. I welcome this as a parent who is waiting for an EHCP plan, and my child gets no help. And he could do with, he's okay, but he could do with a little bit of extra help. It doesn't get that, so this would mean that he would get a little bit of help while he's waiting. When a school is given money for a child who has an EHCP plan, do you monitor where they spend what they spend the money on? Because the school I have not long left receives a significant amount of money for a couple of children, and it does not get spent on them, not all of it. I just wondered if you keep track, and I'm not saying that these children don't deserve the money to help them. They do, and they need it, and school could do so much more for them, but they spend the money elsewhere.
That I would say is the most common feedback and interaction that we've had with parents through this consultation, is the concern about how the money is spent when it's spent in mainstream schools. I would say that across the system, we have the same concern in any type of school, is about the appropriateness of how we spend the money. I would say there's kind of two dimensions to that. So in the executive paper, we have added a further proposal, which is not in the consultation, about the point about monitoring. So the proposal going to the exec is that we would retain the facility to be able to withdraw top-ups if it was evidence that schools were not meeting minimum expectations in terms of the appropriateness of how they were spending that money. We don't have that in the system now. Money goes, and then it simply is up to the school and trust. I think we also need to be having a conversation about what appropriate deployment of that money means and what works and what doesn't. So one of the things we've seen in the system has been a shift to, because it's quite difficult in a school, which is a community, to only spend money on one child. It's really quite difficult to do that. And so what happens is that you get a shift where the two things that you can spend that are just for one child are, and pardon my description, stapling a TA to the child, and alternative provision. Alternative provision can be brilliant. It can also be questionable. And no adult goes around with a person attached to them as a general rule, supporting their daily living. And so as a system, the more we create dependence on TAs, the less able that child is likely to be able to move into adulthood. That doesn't mean that they don't need a support of additional adults. It means that we need to think very carefully about how that's done effectively, and there's very good national research on that. So one of the things I think we need to have is a general conversation that says, what do children benefit from? The things that parents have said most is actually all staff training is the most is the thing that they wanted most for their child, is for everyone in that child's environment to get them and to understand them. I think we're also looking at the role of assessment. And again, that's about getting the child. It's about understanding what makes them tick and making sure we've got the capacity in the system to really interrogate their uniqueness, and for that to then be understood by the people around them. Now, how we turn that from the money into that facility is one of the things that I think we're keen to do and would be part of the wider transformation we're working on.
Thank you. Yeah, that was me. I was stapled to a child all day, every day. And by the end, as we were coming to the end of the year, he hated me because I was always there. And it would have been nice if there was more adults that were trained to be with him. Not that I had a lot of training, but that could have swapped out so he had different people, would have been a lot better. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Ruth, do you want to come in, please, next?
Thank you, Chair. I've got 3 things. I'm just going to go in the different order because of the conversation we just had around teaching assistants. Appreciate that we are talking around the financial side of things here, but support for students in the model is very, very high in particular elements. We know that schools are struggling to recruit learning support assistants. Is it time for us to look at that model and what that looks like in Somerset is my first question.
So
I'll do one at a time, Amelia.
Yeah, so well, I think just on the very basic point about recruitment, one of the things that is not helping recruitment on the current model is the inability to count on money. Because actually, if you're going to recruit someone permanently, you need to know the money is coming for an extended period of time. And we have too many arrangements where it is hand to mouth as far as schools are concerned. That's not helpful because for the level of money that we're putting out into the market, if it's also temporary, then you're significantly reducing the number of people who are willing to do that. But then I think your broader point, Ruth, about the appropriateness of our approach, I think that reflects Councillor Snell's point, which is about asking how do we want our classrooms to work? What kind of knowledge and skill do we want in the school as a whole? And thinking more creatively about real inclusion, which isn't just having that child in the school, but what it takes to genuinely involve them in all the school's ways of working. And what does that look like? There's lots of evidence about this. And Bristol did a useful piece of work recently on the research around this. So I think it is something we need to look at. I think having, if this is agreed by the executive, having more money in the system is an opportunity to say, with this investment, what transformation comes with it. That's a lever to have that conversation. I think schools are very much up for that.
Thank you. My second question is around small schools. So we have some very tiny schools in our area with very low pupil numbers. However, they do attract a high volume of SEND students, mainly due to parents wanting smaller class sizes, understandably. So with the proposal, has that been factored into this to make sure that they aren't going to be disproportionately affected?
So I think we're going in the opposite direction, Ruth, which is hoping that they will be disproportionately affected, but in a good way. And I think one of the things that has been a kind of an ongoing narrative for us in the county has been worrying about the future of our small schools. Actually, I think that we're in a position where we can flip that on its head and see our small schools as a huge advantage for the county. Because when we're talking about there's a reason that small schools are often parental preference, particularly in primary, but if we had them in secondary, they probably would be as well. And that's because children who find the classroom challenging, that classroom is smaller and quieter and is less hectic, that is quite often a supportive place for them. Our small schools bring that just by the nature of how they operate. And the fact that some of them are in old Victorian buildings, for children who are neurodiverse, it's not the physical accessibility which is the greatest concern. It's about that environment and how it operates and the dynamics within that school. So I think the opportunity, the thing that our small schools struggle with is finance a lot of the time, because of the economies of scale of running on such a tiny number. And Councillor Nicholson knows all about this. We have some very, very tiny schools on the moor. It's the economic, but the potential of putting more money in for children with education healthcare plans actually could change that financial model quite considerably for the smallest schools. And certainly some of the conversations we're having is about giving a lifeline to some very, very tiny schools where actually they can become schools of choice and deliberately serving children with SEND rather than worrying about their ability to do so because of the economic impact. And that would be transformational, I think. And there's some of our most amazing, fantastic SEND practitioners are not only in special schools, some of them are in very, very tiny rural schools.
Thank you. And then my last question is, you've mentioned in your proposal about all students being on a school roll. And while I personally agree with that, I do have some concerns around historic issues that we've had with this, and actually the school then understanding their responsibility for monitoring the provision of those students. So and I think you've already partly answered this about the work that's going to executive, but are we confident around the monitoring that it won't just be a case of them being on a school roll and still nobody is monitoring the provision?
I couldn't agree with you more, Ruth. So there's no virtue in being on a school roll if that's not adding anything. So I think what we're looking at is which role and what would that entail in terms of a different way of working. So I don't think we would be looking at simply adding children randomly to school roles, but looking at which roles should we be using and what support needs to be around that, including from the local authority and the kind of commissioned relationships around that. So I think we're at quite an early stage, but we've started conversations with key providers. I have to say, in terms of our alternative provision community, they've been fantastic in wanting to come around the table and collaborate with us to say there are different ways of doing things that would be more transparent, would be safer, and would be cheaper. So we're at an early stage in terms of that, but I'm very happy to come back to this committee and share more when we're able to.
That was my last one. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Francis, Councillor Nicholson.
Thank you very much. This is music to my ears. It's great. And I think much needed. Couple of things. I absolutely appreciate the phasing in, because that kind of impact isn't possible. That kind of financial impact isn't possible until the phasing has happened. There will still people who will feel they're hard done to because they're one side or the other side. There will be schools that will be worrying about this and failing to understand that it's about phasing and not that somebody doesn't care about the particular child they're worried about. But I think what that means is, can we make the phasing as short as possible, as financially as we can manage? That's one plea. There are two others. One is in the consultation questions. It was very clear that the disincentive, if rapid money had been provided, then the disincentive to exclude was you have to pay the money back if the child leaves the school roll, other than to go on another mainstream school roll within 3 years. I would just make a plea that we are careful in our wording, because there are other reasons why a child might leave a school, which actually aren't to do with the school. So I absolutely get the force of it, get the point of it. It's just, can we be really careful with the wording so that we don't get somebody, a school, hung up on for something that actually there was nothing they could have done about. I mean, I mean, I know we wouldn't, but let's have it in the policy that it's like that. I mean, suppose a child is killed in a car crash, you know, that's it. And I know that doesn't happen often, and I know we would manage it, but let's not have to manage it, as it were. Let's have it in the policy that there are reasons why. And no, we can't think of all of them, but just that. There is room for flexibility where it's appropriate. And the third one is about the work, the really welcome work about with the alternative provision world, absolutely, about yeah, not stapling a TA to a child and a child to a TA, about and not about the only things you can do is AP or a TA. Working with the AP world, but also working with our mainstream schools, particularly the ones that are trying to be imaginative, to look at the imaginative ways, to look at the way mainstream schools could be imaginative, which might in fact mean that you didn't have to go and pay for AP. You know, it's about including absolutely everybody in the working the way forward, and I'm convinced you will, but just tiny bit of reassurance.
So in terms of the phasing, and I think, you know, because, and I think this reflects Councillor Redmond's point about, you know, are we on uncharted territories here? Which, you know, we're absolutely, we're sitting on the boundary of uncharted territory, you know, looking over the edge. We don't know what the impact of moving money in this way would be. And so the phasing effectively, you know, is essential for us to see if we start shifting, does that make things, does it start putting us into a cycle of positive improvement, or do we see no shift or even decline? So I think, you know, I can't speak for, you know, colleagues in finance or in decision-making roles, but you'd see if we started to see real positives and financial lessening of pressure, I imagine it'd be quite an easy thing to say, well, can we accelerate this process? But this is, you know, we do have to be quite cautious because we simply don't know. Other than everyone telling us they think it will be better, that will translate into hard numbers. In relation to the emergency money, so I think we're still working out the kind of the fine detail on what the kind of conditions would be, how it would be deployed, making sure we can pay it, as well as what the conditions would be for paying back. I think the thing from our kind of consultation responses is that the critical bit is that a child is not excluded in a non-compliant exclusion. That would be the absolute no-no. And that would absolutely then have to pay back any money that had been put forward. I think other scenarios would absolutely be at the discretion, I think, of, you know, people working in that situation. But that's the red line, is if we put in £12,000 and then you exclude and everyone thinks it's a non-compliant exclusion, you are definitely paying that back. Around alternative provision, absolutely. I think what's, you know, really been encouraging is the number of people coming forward saying, I think we could do something. I think we have spaces that could be used. I think we could participate, and we want to add our ideas into the mix. So I think we'll you know, be committed, if this is agreed, to develop it in a way that is very, very open to all comers. I think the point that you make around it's not all about alternative provision. I think what we observe is people sometimes reaching for alternative provision simply because they don't know what else to do. And I think the really critical thing we want to get to is to understand what are the things that work, what is the evidence base behind that, and have a really clear set of evidence-based interventions that we can deploy across the piece. And it is, what is someone actually doing that makes a difference to that child? And we do have some things that absolutely do work. We need more of that, but we need to name them and then commission them deliberately, rather than say, I think something works. I don't know what it is, but I think that person might. We need to be much clearer than that.
Thank you. Pauline, Councillor Ham.
Hello, yes, so probably this has already been discussed, but the plan, which obviously you have to have a plan, and it's a lovely plan, but it is quite a utopian plan. And I'm just concerned that we can sit around and we can talk about what needs to happen, but actually bringing it to fruition is really quite difficult. And it has to be understood that when you've got SEND children within a mainstream school, it's not just about the SEND children, it's also about the mainstream children whose parents get upset when all this money and time and everything is being spent on these other children that are disrupting the lessons that their children get to. And for this to work, I mean, I think it's brilliant. I'd love it if it did. But for this to work, the funding needs to be available to pay the staff who get paid a very small amount of money compared to other members of the school staff, to actually put this much effort in with the SEND children. And the SEND children themselves are unique in that you can have a SEND child with a very small need and another child who has, you know, like 90% need of attention all the way through the school day. So it's lovely to have that plan, but to put it into fruition, I just hope that there are the sort of under plans that go with it. Thank you.
I'll add a bit to that because one of my questions I was going to come back in. So hypothetically, if this is approved, how are you going to make it happen?
So I think, you know, in terms of the pieces of that delivery, as you said, the money matters. And it matters both in terms of being able to, because you can't do it if you haven't got the bodies. And what is happening at the moment, or at least this is what our numbers are telling us, is that the money is coming from other budgets. So in terms of the rest of the school community, we are constantly underfunding what it actually costs to deliver that child support. It's coming from elsewhere, and it's coming from the rest of the school community. So actually, in terms of if you know, because we can't, you know, we can't build enough special schools for all of the children who potentially you could put in one. It takes too long and it costs tens of millions of pounds. But also what you then have is removing that child from their community. So in order to do this properly, you've got to get the money where that child is, but you've got to fund it properly. That's why the core proposals here are financial ones. In terms of making it happen, we have a children's transformation program. All of the enablers to deliver this are already in the program. So there are a number of things that will support this, which we haven't consulted on because we're already committed to doing them. You'll be aware that the council is very shortly going to large-scale reorganisation. We are proposing to change our staffing structure quite considerably to enable this kind of activity so that we have staff doing jobs that are not currently done. That is a really important enabler because sometimes things are not happening because it's nobody's job to do it, and that is already in the plan. We also are working on a kind of a range of different aspects of things that would be needed to do this. So I mentioned already working with our pupil referral units and alternative provision to think about, you know, different ways of conceiving of how we support children who reach that kind of crisis point. We have my colleague Richard Selwyn, his commissioning team is working with my place planning team to look at sufficiency. We've got £20.9 million in capital allocation that has not been spent. So I'm happy to bring back, and I don't know if it's already on the forward plan, if not, it should be, our proposal around sufficiency strategy of how we will spend that 21 million to create the spaces to support children in a different way. So that's another enabler, and that's that's virtually ready to share in draft format, and some great analysis that's been done there. We're also looking at how we assess. So we do lots of assessment. Our assessments don't speak to each other. The point about understanding children is a really critical one. So looking at where that capacity will come from, that can't be done without some pain, but we've started those conversations already to make sure that we have the expertise to do the assessments and also the interventions to change how we operate. So there's quite a few irons in the fire that are already in train that overall make up the Children's Transformation Programme. These proposals are enablers because without some of these things being in place, other things won't be able to happen.
Thank you. Simon, I'm just going to...
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I might be completely asking the wrong sort of question here. I'm assuming the pathway is already in operation elsewhere or trialed elsewhere, and hopefully won't be trialed on our own children. But within the stages, I can see why we've got different stages, because a child's got to transition back into mainstream education. However, each stage the child goes through is going to be disruptive to them. They'll need time to adapt in between each stage. And how do we assess when a child is ready to move on, in order that they don't bounce back between the different stages?
Absolutely brilliant question. So I think what you have identified is that the movement of children around the proposed stages is absolutely critical to get right. Those stages are not new stages. Children will already be in that position as we stand today, but we have no mechanism to coordinate them moving between. So what happens is, as you can expect, is they get stuck. And they will get stuck at stage 0 in their bedroom. They will get stuck with some combination of support at home for years. They'll get stuck off role, or they'll get stuck in a special school where everyone says, actually, this child could absolutely be in mainstream, but there's no way for them to move on. We've got lots of children who are currently stuck in pupil referral units. So that principle about the importance of carefully managing a child moving from a place where they are to where they ought to be is absolutely paramount for children's outcomes, because at the moment they're stuck all over the place. And some of those stuck relationships are costing us an eye-watering amount of money. So the assessment of where they are, how they're progressing, and where they need to get to be is the most critical bit. So I think the bit that sits behind the model that I shared, which is how do we know how a child is doing, and how do we know that they're moving on and ready to move on, and that they have landed in a new arrangement successfully, is, I think, one of the most critical things that we could change. Because at the moment, we have nothing. Now, there's been some work from educational psychology, working with some of our pupil referral units to start to look at this. But when you think about it in this terms, it seems like a really obvious gap. But at the moment, we have no framework to do that. So it's a really important piece of work.
I think that was one of the points that I was going to bring in now. We have a situation where this is a fundamental change in the way we're doing things, and we need to be bringing people with us. I know the consultation will be the first stage in that. What sort of timetable are you looking at for this? So should the executive agree? When and what plans are we having?
So I think our timetable is as soon as humanly possible. And that is because of the number of children that we have in crisis. So I have a list of children that I cannot currently fund in any way, who are absolutely in crisis, and who, wherever they are, in whatever arrangement, we're saying, can you just hold on till the 4th of November in the hope that that decision will be made on that day. That is how urgent the situation is with children across the county. We are preparing, so obviously we can't preempt an executive decision, but we're putting as many conversations as possible in place so that if we get agreement, things can move forward rapidly. I think it is a fundamental change, and any change divides opinion, but I have never encountered something where the level of division has been so low, because so many people are, I can only use the word desperate for something to change. And I think what they have struggled with, and I don't know how many people have said this to my face, they just want to know where we are going, that is going to be better than what we have. And I think what has been very encouraging is bringing this forward and reflecting back to them what they have told us, is that they've said, yes, we think this would be better than what we have now, because at the moment, it feels like they are holding a crisis with no end in sight. And what they want to know is how quickly can we show them what different would look like. Now, one of the things I would observe is that where we have an untenable situation, and I've had this conversation with a number of leaders, they've said, this is an untenable situation. I've said, right, but we haven't got any option for you until X point. They've said, if I know when this is going to be resolved, I can hold on. And therefore, for us, putting these plans in place, the timeliness of that, but also knowing what the destination is and when that will be realized, enables people to have the resilience to carry on for a bit longer until something can be brought to bear. So what I would say is we're working at pace. If we had longer, I would have more detailed, lovely programmatic plans for you and all of that. But we are just having to build we're having to design in flight because the crisis isn't waiting for us. So I would say as soon as possible.
Thank you. One final question for me, then I'll just summarise. So I'm assuming the feedback that you showed us, obviously for the consultation that's finishing today, it was a lot of yes, no answers, but were there any open questions and where will that feedback, the open responses, be going?
Yes, and by the way, we've just encountered what a co-pilot can do for consultation responses, and AI have instantly analysed all the responses for us, because obviously we had a lot of open text, because we thought it was important that people describe to us their experience. So we will be reading all of the open responses, but in terms of timeliness, co-pilot has analysed them already, and is doing so as they come in, and there's a very, very consistent picture coming across. And I would say what Councillor Snell has just reflected is one of the most common responses is, how are you going to make sure the money gets well spent? And so that's why one of the proposals in the executive paper is specifically to add that in terms of our ability to shift our capacity, because if we stand down costed plans, we are investing an enormous amount of staff capacity in that work. The idea is that we will have more capacity to work on annual reviews, which is the appropriate point to challenge. We're also developing Team Around the School, which is another mechanism to have that conversation about the whole cohort and to look at how resources are being spent and what the impact of that is. So that is obviously a key area, and that's, I think, the most common theme coming from those free text answers.
Thank you. Okay. I look to try and summarise this a little bit. We've been taking notes as we've been going to try and feed back in, and I'm sure if I get the opportunity, I'll be at executive to try and feed back the committee's position. The committee, I think, are generally supportive of the proposals and the responses for, based on obviously the amount that we've had of feedback and the plans, etc. I suppose there's a general concern about the implementation of it, how we're going to actually do it. More to the point, the bit that I think is important is how we're going to monitor the implementation and feedback and learn, so that the loop that would have to be created. So I'm assuming you have a team in place to be able to do that. One of the points is that this is doing things with partners. So one of the things that's important is we bring the partners with us. And in that, I think one of the things that's important, we need to pay. I know it shouldn't need to be said, but it is that the child must be put at the centre of all of this. That has to be one of the things that's going, and it's all done together. We talked about time scale and implementation. The need to monitor the funding, how it's being spent, and again making sure that it's being spent well. A really good point I think that's important that we need to include is obviously the need to take schools with us, but that's schools of any size, because of the fact that the best place for a child's education is the one nearest their home, and into the best of the ability to meet that. Need for children to be all on roll, and with that comes with the plan and support that's necessary to enable that. We talked about what next in the child bounce to make sure that the children are being moved and monitored. The questions we asked about were about who and how that transition will be managed, making sure that we need to do that. It's going to executive, and I think we're generally in support along with everything, but there's a need for some more detail. The committee expressed, I suppose the best way to do it would be that the implementation plan is going to be the important bit in all of this, in how we making sure. So I would have interest in being kept up to date on that. With that comes the what next. So how soon do you think we should be looking for feedback? So you're ready to go. it will be early November. So when might the committee want to have a look at this again? Or when would you suggest we want to have the implementation feedback?
So what we're working towards is to start with new funding arrangements in January. So I would say that in the early in the spring term, I would expect us to have something that is describing all the enablers of that.
I've just asked the vice chair, is this something that the education subgroup that we've got, would this be going to them?
We haven't discussed that, but that certainly if we want to look at the detail of it, and certainly there's a lot of data that sits behind it, so we could share some of that if that group wanted to report back. Absolutely, if you wanted more time for that.
Thank you. And so are we saying, so January, so around March would be a good time to come back?
Certainly by March, we would expect to have a fully fledged plan, or we would expect to have some things already in train by that point, yeah.
Okay. That's fine. So we'll look at bringing it back in March, definitely. Can I also ask that we find a way to feed back informally on how it's going? Yeah, I think it's going to be, this is such a fundamental change in the way we're doing things, and it would be interesting to understand. And I expect, or I would hope, that the executive will be asking a similar question. We need to be kept up to date in how it's going forward. So again, just underwrite that we'll bring it back substantive in March. But if something happens sooner, if we could find a way to feed back, that would be helpful. Members, are there any points or issues that I haven't covered there? We'll obviously have to have a look at the minutes and the feedback and build the questions, and we'll put a comment piece together for when it goes to executive. But I know that our executive member's been here and listening in depth to what we've been saying. Anything I've missed?
So I just want to add, because you mentioned partners, and we haven't touched on that. We are obviously in discussion with colleagues in the NHS, including CAMS, and they have been very supportive from the start, and it fits very closely with what they would want to do through our commissioning arrangements.
It's an exciting time, I think, because a lot of us have been around long enough to see the hole get deeper, and hopefully there's a chance that we might be able to start lowering the ladder soon, and bringing our young people, getting them the education that they deserve and need. So I think that. Thank you for the report. Thank you, members, for your questions. Unless anyone says anything, I'll draw this element of the meeting to this item to a close. With that, I've also suggested a comfort break at this point. So I was looking at the clock up there, thinking it was only 11 o'clock. So it's 11:42 now. Should we be back and get ready to go at 11:50? That gives you 8 minutes. Thank you. Okay, members, thank you very much. Officers, thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention and your feedback in the last item. It really is an exciting time for us as a council for that, particularly among the SEND issues. Moving on then, agenda item 8 is SWAP, Southwest Audit Partnership. That's why I paused. I just remember what the acronym was. Audit on education, health and care plan payments. It looks like it's Amelia again. Unless, Heather, did you want to introduce it? Or?
Yeah, so no, thank you. I'm really learning as I go along more about the internal audit and the contribution of internal audit. And this one obviously was put in place before I got involved in the seat, but I think it's really interesting to see. I'd be interested as well as we unpack it, because it's education, healthcare, EHCP plan payments. So of course there will be some scoping issues on this audit where it's gone so far. It's talking about the point after which an EHCP I think has been approved and what happens then with the payments. But of course it may well, when I was reading through it, may well have thrown up some things about the previous part of the process too. But I will leave it to people better qualified than me to actually explain more about the scope. But I think just we might have to take care with the scope of this audit and what it's telling us and what it's not. But yeah, all good and helpful stuff, I think.
Thank you. Before I bring Amelia in, just to let everyone know, we did write to the chair of audit with the opportunity to come in. Obviously, audit as it is should be going through the audit committee. But I asking Mike if he could join us if he could. Obviously, I don't think he's joined us just yet, but I just wanted to let you know we did preempt that bit and ask our colleagues to make them aware. So, Amelia.
So, as you said, we don't ordinarily bring audit reports here. We have specifically brought this one to this committee because of the intersection with what we have just been discussing, and because of our relationship with the local government ombudsman. So we perhaps in children's services in the past might not have spent anywhere near as much time with the local government ombudsman as we now are doing. And we're spending a lot of time with them because the volume of complaints that are going to the ombudsman at the moment is really, really high. You will have seen in the budget report, things coming together, seen the budget report, the costs that are mounting up in the budget in education that are linked to ombudsman fines. And we are being fined by the ombudsman for various things. The ombudsman doesn't just fine us, they also make recommendations that we have to comply with. Some of the recommendations, some of them are essentially requirements. And one of them is to make sure that this committee is cited on what we are doing to tackle some of the issues. I have requested a meeting with the assistant ombudsman to talk about how we can make this reporting more effective, but also one of the things we're keen to do is with this committee is to make sure that you're cited on that improvement activity going forward. So, as you said, this is to comply with the local government ombudsman remedy action that we have been given, and to just share the recommendations. So what they asked for us was for us to review and to put in improvement. We had already requested this internal audit by SWAP, and so we felt they were the best people to do this remedy because they would have that internal audit independent view. I also just wanted to share the LGO focus report. So they are getting a lot of work to do in relation to this area. And so they've done a report, and that's based on national outcomes in this space, which we have tapped into for our own actions. Next slide. So we had already requested the audit. I don't know if you're familiar with the audit program, but we have ongoing conversations about things that we want them to look at. We find it very, very useful because they provide the capacity to go in and really look at an area, and they help us to formulate our actions and to test that what we're doing is strong. So the areas that they looked at was the process for EHCP decisions, the effectiveness of our systems, timeliness, how we share information, and the governance. And one of the things just to flag with you, so you can see we've just been talking about money, but the huge increase in volume has an impact on process as well. So if your process was designed for a much smaller number of cases, you will have problems when those numbers jump. But also, if your systems and processes have been designed for a system with a lower level of crisis and conflict, that will come under huge pressure. And if both of those things happen, both numbers jump and the difficulty of making those decisions jump, your processes are going to be severely tested. And that is exactly what has happened. Next slide. So the conclusions that the auditors came from, they identified that vacancies had an impact. So you get a perfect storm. Numbers are going up. The difficulty in making those decisions is going up because your situations are becoming more complex and harder to resolve. That makes the work harder. And unsurprisingly, these are not necessarily very senior posts. People don't want to do that job anymore because it's not very enjoyable, and it can be a very high conflict environment where you're getting a lot of pushback from everyone you're interacting with. That means that in trying to bring in new people, because the workload is high, there's little time to deliver staff training, and it's a complex process. So it's quite difficult to get on top of. So those are all familiar things we've been talking about for many years in children's social care. And that's not, in many cases, not a very different case. That what we have been able to learn as a system is that actually children's social care have spent a lot of time learning how to get this kind of thing right. So we have been learning from some of our very expert colleagues in children's social care about how you document business processes, about how you make them more efficient and how you implement them effectively, but that's at an early stage. As a result, because of things that you will see if you have low vacancies, backload in training, complexity, that you then quality and completeness becomes inconsistent. We also have an issue with our management information system. We use a company called Capita. We've been using Capita for a long time. Capita used to be absolutely dominant in the education sector. Virtually, at one point, virtually every school in the country had a Capita management information system. Their dominance in the market has dropped dramatically. A lot of people have left. Capita One, the product has been sold. Our experience with the company, I would say, has not been good. They've been unresponsive. And we've had to sometimes escalate to Claire to write to the chief executive to demand action. The system isn't helping. It's outdated, and we struggle to get it to reflect our ways of working. Particularly, we have to evolve our processes to make them more effective. It's a very, very inflexible system. So we're currently considering what it would take to retender our contract, but anyone who's ever been involved in changing a management information system, particularly with statutory data and very large numbers of children, there's over 100,000 records. This is not a small task. And then all of the pressures on the system mean that performance monitoring is a gap. So you can see kind of the interconnectedness of these issues, but they are resulting in lower performance than we would have wished. Next slide. Apologies, that is the words are very, very small there, but that's just so you have sight of our action plan. So in terms of the priority issues, top of the list is a new information management system, and also looking at the funding processes. And we've got Joe here, who is working very closely with us, just to look at the impact that's had on our finance team, not only on the SEND statutory team. Work is being done around training and looking at reconciliation processes, again, interconnection with finance. We have standardized the induction process, so the first members of staff are getting a new induction that's better targeted to the things we've identified. And as you said, we are about to launch a large-scale reorganization, because the clarity about roles and responsibilities is something that has come through. We have been, in other parts of the transformation program, looking at something we called hard cases. We had a very large number of children that we knew were stuck in the system because we didn't know how to resolve their case, mainly because we couldn't find them a school. We knew we had 140 children. We started that process. We moved on 300 children, and in the process, we identified 800 more. We are seriously insufficient. We have a very large number of children that we identify would probably need a special school place at this time. Every single special school has been expanded to breaking point. There are no more spaces. That's why we're shifting our sufficiency strategy to look at different ways of providing that capacity, both in mainstream and using mainstream space to provide specialist provision. We are looking at Capita data that we do have to identify, to inform our performance management. And we are looking at annual reviews. This is very complex. The number one thing that is meaning we don't complete our annual reviews, as is our statutory requirement, is the amount of time it takes to do it. And I sat down with one of our members of staff to watch what she does. There are 5,000 EHCPs. Every single one needs to be updated every single year. And to update a single EHCP, I watched her do it. I didn't sit with her for the whole process because it takes between 2 and 3 hours. That is not achievable over 5,000 plans and counting. So that should be done through technology. Our system isn't enabling us to do that. Schools are keen to step in this space and do more themselves. We need the technology to enable that. So all of that is in train, but it is an identified gap, and it was something that was flagged in the JTI, the Joint Thematic Area Inspection of Serious Youth Violence. What happens if EHCPs are not kept up to date through the annual review system? So it is identified area. For the purpose of this audit, they identified it as priority 3. For other reasons, I would say it was a higher priority for us for the interconnected impact of that. We'll just move on to the next slide. There are a series of questions recommended for scrutiny, which we have helpfully, potentially offered. You can tell us whether you agree. We have a direct payment policy. You can see that. Most of that is outlined in the personal budget in direct payment policy. If members of this committee would like to see that, we can provide it. It's available on the website. We have an agreement around personal budgets. And we monitor direct payments. We have had a number of ombudsman cases relating to those, which is why this is included and is in their report. Finally, final slide. We just wanted to flag that in the course of agreeing this with the ombudsman, we have undertaken another audit around inclusion, financial management and control. Obviously, this is relevant in the context of some of the things we've just been discussing about money. This was a stronger area. If you know our audit reports, reasonable I haven't seen a lot of reasonable outcomes, and there were no priority actions. And I think credit to our finance colleagues, sound system of governance, risk management and control. We have some issues that we'll be taking forward, but that was an area where they felt that was stronger in terms of performance. That's all from me, Lee.
I'll start. Forgive me if the operation of this process here, EHCP plans, and is going to be a fundamental item in making sure that our young people's education need is identified. So that so if I'd realised beforehand, I'd put this before the last item, because it would have been in a timely position being before now, so we can understand. But just a quick question. We seem to be identifying that the capita system is one of the reasons why it's at fault. I think that's one of the things you said, and you're potentially looking to change the capita system. And if I read this right, that's not going to be until Q3 next year, March to May next year. But in the meantime, we're going to be trying to patch what we've got to make it work. Surely that's the timeline of repair is a bit out of sync in effect. We're patching something up to get it working in the short term to make a fundamental change next year.
So the timescales are around implementation. The issue with systems is that they are very, very slow to change. So effectively, we are already working on going on the procurement process in terms of that specification. But this is a very big and costly system. So that there is legislation that guides how that procurement has to run, and then what activities it would take to transfer all that data safely from one system to the next. So that's the only reason that the timescales are so long. There isn't any feasible way of doing it faster, but I can assure you that we are putting all of the pressure that we know how to make sure that that timescale is as rapid as can be achieved within the law.
So has the procurement process started for a new system?
We have to complete the full draft specification first. So that work absolutely has started, but you can't go to procurement until you've specified what it is that you need to procure.
Members, any questions? Simon Carswell.
Thank you, Lee Redburn. I don't know whether this is a question you can answer, but you're saying about the workload on staff, on officers. Do we know and it may be that this isn't how it's done, the number of cases allocated to each caseworker, what it presently is, what it historically was, and what would be the ideal?
That is a very, very good question. Yes, smashing it out of the park today, Councillor Carswell. I don't have those numbers in my head, but now that you've asked them, I feel like I ought. So I'll certainly take that away and inquire. I think the thing that we've identified in terms of workload is about how much, what's the word for it? How much stuckness is being managed. So if a request for assessment comes through and that request is straightforward. So for example, a request comes through, there's a very clear evidence base, that child's parents' preference for that child to remain in their mainstream school, and the mainstream school confidently feels that they can do that, and everyone is agreed, it will shoot through the system. That is a small minority of the cases coming through, and they get from there, and they escalate in complexity from there. So I think the volume of cases is perhaps less of an impact capacity-wise than how difficult it's going to be to find a solution for that child, because what happens is the whole system gets bogged down in going round the houses and then just circling on the spot, not being able to resolve it. That generates a huge amount of traffic from parents and schools, understandably going, why is this case not resolved? It results potentially in a huge amount of workload in managing conflict if something is named that people don't agree with, and then it gets into the courts. So that the cost of conflict and inability to resolve the situation is what is creating the workload. If there is a low level of conflict, you can deal with an enormous number of cases because it's quite procedural and it will slide through the system quite easily. So it's the challenge in resolving, finding a successful solution for that child. That is what is pushing the system to breaking point.
Ruth?
Thank you, Chair. My question is, obviously this has come off the back of multiple complaints via the Ombudsman. Have we actually looked at and audited the complaint system? Because for this to have got to that level, the complaints would have had to have come into the council initially, because the Ombudsman will not look at it unless the person has gone through the complaints procedure. So my question is it partly due to our complaints procedure not being as effective as it could be?
So I think the issue of the complaints process is that it's in several parts. So initially, when a complaint comes in, it is managed by the service. And we know that that's first stage of that process, particularly in terms of the SEND casework process, the SEND casework team managing that process, with the volume of work that they're doing and the high turnover of staff in that service, there's not always the adherence to the priority, if you like, for complaints that there possibly should, well, there definitely should be. I think people are trying to prioritise them, but when you haven't got enough staff and they're trying to do several things in terms of managing assessments, reviews, complaints, etc., it can not be completely effective. So part of the restructure, which obviously will be public, no, not public, but available to staff in the next week or so, will address some of that issue. I think, to be fair to the customer experience team, which is the corporate team, once the work actually gets into that process, which is called stage 2 and then to stage 3, it becomes much slicker. We do have a process that I have put in that I oversee on a weekly basis, all the complaints that come through the system, with some senior people in that part of the system to try and make sure that we are acknowledging and dealing with those complaints in a timely manner. But as Amelia says, these are not really straightforward complaints largely. They're about quite complex issues that require a lot of detailed research and a lot of detailed discussion. And some of it is also, in terms of the complaints that get to the Ombudsman, is about lack of appropriate provision. And some of what Amelia has said already about the insufficiency of SEND provision does play into those complaints and the financial penalties that the Ombudsman hands out, which is an issue across the country, which certainly the Association of Directors of Children's Services is trying to get some resolution for.
Thank you. Chair, could I ask if this is something that as a committee we might want to look at in more depth moving forward around the actual number of complaints that are coming in and the resolution of those, so that we aren't getting ombudsman fines?
Thank you for the recommendation. Some of you may have picked it up, but I did mention at the beginning of the meeting when we talk about our work plan that I've asked the Director of Children's Services to bring us a report looking at I think the last couple of years worth of complaints, wasn't it, Claire? With a view to look at that. I hope I preempted the question, Ruth. So yes, at our next meeting there will be a report coming forward with looking at the last batch of complaints to see whether there's any consistency there. So thank you for that. And maybe one of the outcomes for that may be that we need to look at this a little bit harder for where we are. Sorry, Amelia, did you want to come back?
Yeah, we certainly welcome the committee looking at it. I think one of the things that has really struck me, having come into this area from not having worked in this field before in other parts of education, was that there appears, I think, nationally to have been an issue with concluding that when we see conflict in the system, it's because someone has been doing a bad job. And actually what I observe coming into it is the reason that we're getting conflict in the system is because something isn't working, and the jobs that people have been given to do are unachievable. What we're being asked, and that's why conflict happens, because someone says, why isn't this happening? And the person has nothing other to give. Then I have nothing to give you. The organization or the system or the country has not provided anything to resolve your situation. And that quite ends. And quite often they're very junior members of staff being put in an absolutely intolerable position. Unsurprisingly, they don't stay. So I think that's incumbent on us as an organization, but also in terms of, putting our request to government to say, we need to make things achievable, and then people will do a much better job, because that's what they came here to do. They didn't come in to be locked in an impossible situation.
Are you happy with my response, Ruth?
Yes, thank you, Chair. That's excellent.
Thank you. I'll bring in Francis now. Francis Nicholson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It feels an incredibly intractable problem for all the reasons that you've said. There are just a few things, and I suppose it starts from nothing takes up so much time as not being able to resolve something. And it gets worse for everybody, and it's intolerable for parents who are actually taking a huge strain. It's also incredibly difficult for, as you say, very often junior staff. There are little bits at the edges of this, and I know I'm only just at the edges of this. I'm with the chairman, Mr. Chairman, on the data question. If people dealing with schools are relying on data in a system which isn't collecting the data from other teams, which is relevant to what's being discussed and worked with schools, then that's another way of it going wrong. So we do need, it does need to be possible to make sure there is, that the people dealing with schools do have the right information, as opposed to not having it. And I would like to know a bit more about how that can possibly work. One of the things that goes wrong when everybody has too much to do is not being able to pay enough attention, and that makes it even worse, because somebody gives an answer and it isn't heard, so the question's asked again and the conflict rises up. A bit of that, and the whole, I can quite see nobody wants the particular job or finds it very difficult to stay. One of the things is the kind of level of difficulty and conflict is the sort of thing that social workers have to deal with, who have a different status and support system. So in terms of support for our junior staff who are the casework teams, how how that is going to play in with what we will be hoping to do. And the second one is that the lack of, I mean, again, but in comparison with social workers, there's no national training, there's no national standard. And I'm reminded of a young person I knew who, having qualified in the area that she was working in, said, there's no training post qualification. So she decided that she would make sure there was, and she employed all the people who'd been teaching her to do the post qualification. So there's something about can we have the capacity and the vision to see that somebody needs to, in the way that we're breaking the mold with how we're dealing with funding for schools for SEND, is there something about there needs to be some national training? What kind of noise and what kind of effect can we have?
I've picked everything up here in terms of the data. So when I gave the timescales around replacing the system, I'll just make it clear that we're not going to sit and wait for a new system to make sure that what we've got we are using as well as we can, because the thing is, unless we have good quality data in our existing system, even if it is not working as we want, that's the data that is going to be lifted up and put into the new system. So we all experience that with Dynamics. You don't get a new bunch of data. They take your old data and they put it into your new system, and then you carry all of the pros and cons with that, more often cons than pros. So we're working on that now. I think your 2 points about, paying attention to the problem and the level of difficulty in the job. One of the things that I have observed is that you can sometimes in organizations end up with a situation where you end up delegating complexity to the lowest possible point in the system, rather than holding complexity at the level of seniority for the people who have the qualifications and expertise to do that. And that's one of the things that we are looking at, is how did so many things that were not irreducibly complex, but, really very close to it, end up moving down the system in terms of seniority rather than being held. And one of the things that we did with the hard cases was to say, we have people with PhDs, we've got a whole suite of them in our education psychology team. We have very, very highly paid expert people who have knowledge. We need to bring the hardest cases up to the level of seniority and expertise that is able to crack through the hardest problems, not leave them kind of floating hierarchically down the system to other staff. And so that's something that we need to rectify going forward in the long term. And then in terms of national training and standards, I think so I think there's a question for us about our workforce in terms of who are we talking about and what are the jobs we are asking them to do? Because I think the principle of having SEND casework as a profession was, I think, a concept when effectively what they were doing is they were moving things through the system, dealing with a particular group of children with long-term conditions in a sense, in a context that was different to the one we have now. So I think there's a question for us to say, yes, everyone should have the relevant training and qualifications that is appropriate to their work, but we also need to ask a question, is are we having have we got the right workforce for today rather than for 10 years ago or 20 years ago for that matter?
Thank you. Marcus, Councillor Kravis.
Dante can say Kravis, but I won't go into the English language at the moment. Thank you. I think with this item and the last item, I feel like I've got a case of imposter syndrome going on. I mean, what I think is encouraging is the fact that, with the fact that I think this is the second, I think last month, wasn't there? But the fact that we've embraced the Ombudsman and rather than just circling the wagons and, we've looked into it as something to be commended. And I think that's really good news. But at the same time, also, when we talk about Ombudsman, I always wonder, should there be an ombudsman? I wonder, it'd be lovely to know more the detail of, I think that's what suggested some of the complaints and actually how they were dealt with. But I suppose my question is I think you said that the Ombudsman has this, there's a national issue going on. And actually, do we feel that we're getting a local response, or do we feel we're getting a bit of a national response? Just wondered about your view on that. And but my other one was probably a little bit more specific. I mean, the 5,000 cases you talked about, or the 5,000 a year, was quite a shocking statistic, I suppose. And you talked about using technology. But then how do we then, who controls the technology? Because, I know it's moved on a bit. And you mentioned Copilot earlier, and I've found some interesting uses for Copilot in writing emails. I should do it more often. But how do we stop that situation where people are just thinking, oh, the computer says no? And how do we stop that? And how do we stop that creating more work going forward?
So in relation to the Ombudsman, I don't know if they understand our local context, which is why I've requested a meeting with the office so that we can understand where each other are coming from. I think what colleagues from the team have helped me understand is that up till now we've been dealing with the Ombudsman's requirements on a case-by-case basis, rather than looking at them systemically and saying, well, they're all tapping into the same issues and we're coming back. And I think what we've observed is the Ombudsman's directives have been ramping up in terms of their level of expectation. And they're starting to get to a point of thinking, well, do they understand what is actually achievable in this space and where we're at the bounds of our powers? So that's why I think a conversation is important at this point, to say, how do we get this to a place where we can assure them that we take this as seriously as they do, that they've got visibility of our plans, we're keeping them up to date, but we don't end up in an arms race of requirements where they feel they're not getting traction. That's the first thing. Around the technology, so I think the where we are exploring Copilot is in the drafting of EHCPs, not in the bit that takes a very, very expert person to do it, but in the compiling of the document. Because what Copilot is good at is taking the stuff that we all generate and turning it into prose in a very short space of time, not in generating the content, but in moving the words around the page. So I think that's a bit of useful use of technology, doing the heavy labor and cutting and pasting and that kind of thing. In terms of the risk of computer says no, I can't think of any scenario where we are conceiving that a computer would have anything that would have an implication in terms of decision making. I'd be very uncomfortable with that. But I do think that they can do more heavy lifting in terms of paper shuffling, if I can describe it that way, because what we need is people's brains freed up to wrestle with these really big, challenging human situations where we have in the past resourced the production of paper. And it's not paper anymore. What we need to be doing is cutting out as much paper creation and getting the computer to do that more than it is now. So we can use the human beings for the human questions.
Thank you. A couple of points. First of all, I think this is telling us something that we've known for a long time, and it's been what people have been telling us, is that the EHCP system doesn't work, and so the fact that we've got this, I would be interested to see the report itself, because that's not here, because I'm a little bit confused, because the way that the scope is clear, the key conclusions are clear, which I can support. The system is broke. We haven't got enough people doing it. We're too slow in doing it. But the bit that I'm confused about, if you jump to the questions, suggested question for scrutiny, I would wondering where they came from, because that's talking about personal payments, not the process. So it's where's the relevance? Couldn't see any content about personal payments previously. So can you answer that one first?
Yeah, absolutely. And apologies, this is a where we are in terms of slight randomness of our interactions with the Ombudsman. The Ombudsman specifically directed us to share their report and these with Scrutiny. So this is what I mean about the kind of discontinuous conversation we're having with the Ombudsman, is they take an individual child's case and they will say, we require you to do X, Y, and Z in relation to this specific case. What they're not doing is having a general conversation with us about the whole context. That's where I'd like to take it next. So some of the things they've asked us to make sure that we have shared, but they're a little bit ad hoc because of the way that they're dealing with an individual case by case. What I feel it might be useful coming forward is for us to do a compilation of everything we've had from the Ombudsman, so that you can see the totality of what they've said to us, and then how that then tracks to our overall program, because what they are directing us to tell you is a little bit decontextualized because it's based on individual cases.
Some of the reason why I've asked for the report to come to the December meeting, because I went to look at some of the reports that come, and one of the suggestions in all of the reports is that the outcome is made aware to either the executive member or the scrutiny committee. And I thought to myself, well, I've never seen it, which is why that's the first thing I did, was just that let's start seeing these and understand. But I'm still a little bit confused. But let me see if I can explain it in my head how I see this. They've looked at one individual case and given us some responses that talk about that individual case, but also the whole system. Is that?
Well, yes, then they've done that times, 100 or so. So we have individual children where they've made different requirements about different parts of the system. We're playing catch up here because actually there should have been a conversation that we were having. I was sharing things with you as a committee on a regular basis over a period of time. We've now got a backlog of things they think you should know. And I think what would be helpful is for us to take a step back from here, because this is one where they're waiting. We've got to go back to them and say it's on the agenda. We've discussed it. We need to then do an overview of everything we've been talking to the Ombudsman about, and also do that reboot with the Ombudsman so that all of those conversations feel a bit more joined up, because we're playing catch up, I think, in this space.
Yeah. So I'm just trying to think where. So I acknowledge, I think the committee support the fact that we need to have a reboot here and understand where we are. I think the first step in that will be the report that's coming to the next committee, to the December meeting, that looks at some of the previous decisions and gives us then a bit more perspective. I'll paraphrase, this is my personal perspective of this particular element rather than as chair, but we've identified that we need to do something about it. The timescale to me is concerning, because we're patching up something that's not necessarily working with a view to potentially at some point in the future bringing a new system in. So what I would think, reading this, and correct me if I'm wrong, we need two things running in parallel. We need, what can we do to correct the hole that we're in, and what can we do to help the next phase going forward get better?
So if you're speaking specifically about Capita, that timeline is absolutely moving ahead. But you're right, we're not going to wait for that. We've got something happening in parallel to deal with what we've got now, because we need both of those things to happen. I think that perhaps that's not very clear in the delivery timeline. I think with the 31st of March 25, that's a delivery date, not a start date. So that's when we would expect that to be concluded, not starting.
Okay, so
in terms of Capita, a new system would not be in place for at least 12 months, if not 18 months.
That's a problem.
Yeah, because actually, in order to do it, as Amelia said, we have to pull the spec together, we have to go out to procurement, which is like a 9-month process in itself. And then we have to get it in, and we have to then move everything across from one system to another. It's not a quick job. So even if we did it incredibly fast, which currently there are not council resources to support, because we're not the top of the priority list for digital transformation, we'd be looking at least 12, 18 months. I think we're more likely to be looking at 2 to 3 years on the basis of the prioritisation currently.
Thank you. That was where I was going with it. So what are we doing now? Because with forgive me, we've already, so the previous item identified the fact that the implementation of these plans was problematic, and we're putting a new system in place to rejig. This is saying that our identification and our process for putting in place these plans is flawed or time delayed. That's two issues that are massively impacting our young people, and we're under a reorganisation. So my concern is that this is telling me I've got red flags, flashing blue lights, red lights. There's a big issue here. So the question is, so Director or Director of Education, Director of Children's Services, Executive Member, what are we doing to help our children get the care that they need, and what are we doing to rectify the problem now?
Right, so a lot of things. So as you've identified, so I don't know if any of you have ever worked in an inadequate school or inadequate organization. What you find when things are not working is that everything is not working at once. I don't, we have sometimes and I think they've taken out a system where is it one safeguarding thing will take down a school, but a school that is, is genuinely inadequate across the board. You haven't got the staffing, the data isn't there, your technology doesn't work, you've got problems with your buildings, your funding isn't right, your leadership, I mean, literally everything has got a problem. And so what you're absolutely right about, Councillor Edmund, is that there are significant, complex, expensive challenges in lots and lots of different areas. Now, the system has improved, it was worse. But what has happened was that as improvements have been made since the last inspection, which was a very, very challenging inspection, a number of things have improved, but the system around us has been escalating in challenge at that time. So the level of improvement has not been sufficient to deal with the absolute skyrocketing level of demand and challenge. So we have huge systemic issues that we are wrestling with, and they all need to be fixed tomorrow at the same time, in parallel. This is next level hard. So you're absolutely right to identify this. I'm confident that we do have the right plans in place, but as you've just seen in our previous agenda item, we are having to be very, very innovative and ambitious to deal with the level of challenge that this presents. So you're right to say this is an area of concern. Do I think that we could spend a week on this and only scratch the surface, really? We're doing a lot in a lot of spaces. I'm very happy to try and share more of that with this committee if that would help provide the necessary scrutiny and challenge to what we're doing.
Yes. We need to, forgive me members if I'm speaking out, but I think the last two items have identified an issue that some of us have been aware of, but the size of the issue, everything I see is adding into that. So, and I'm at a loss for words as to what next. I would suggest that I can have a meeting within the next 2 weeks to try and look at how we're going to do this, because this is a huge issue. I know I'm telling you something you already know, but we're talking about kicking the can down the road potentially. I know metaphorically we're saying that we know the issue. We've known the issue for a long time, but what next? That's my question. The Director of Children's Services. What next?
So I suppose in terms of the system issue, there is a timescale for that, and we may with some influence be able to bring that slightly further forward in terms of getting high priority in the council. We do employ teams of people to manually input into Capita because it does not work, and to manually check what is going on in that system. It's a national issue. There are working groups in every part of the country looking at all these different issues of Capita, and we are doing everything we can to try and manage the information in terms of making sure it is as accurate as possible in terms of things like attendance, etc., on that system. It is not entirely successful. I do regularly, haven't done it for a couple of months, but regularly write to the Chief Executive in Capita saying this is not acceptable. There are some safeguarding issues there, because actually when we don't know if we've got the accurate information about attendance, we don't know who's at school and who isn't. Neither do schools, to be fair, sometimes because of the data sources. So yes, that is a massive issue. And what we need to do, so I suppose we're taking the opportunity of knowing that system doesn't work, knowing it needs to change, to say, well, why don't we do what we know we need to do, which is what Jill and Gary will talk to you about a little bit, and integrate all the information into one place, so that we have one system for education, for social care, for everybody to be able to see the child's whole journey, the whole child in one place. Because at the moment you see a bit of a child that's inaccurate in education in Capita, the information about social care in the social care system, record system. The youth justice system has a separate information sharing system. So everybody has different bits of information. So it feels like the right thing to do is to try and pull all that into one place. But even if we did it really fast, we've got to get a system that can do that, and there aren't many systems that can, in the way we would want it to do. So getting us into the right place is sadly about exactly what you said, in terms of putting patches over things while we try to get the right system in place. Those patches are not always completely effective. I have to be very honest about that. And we, as I say, we have teams of people who are checking that data, inputting it, checking the manual input of it, because the system is not working electronically in the way that we want it to. In terms of the HCP aspect of that, the data input for EHCPs, I think, is less of an issue in terms of the input of data and more about capacity in the system, because a lot of that is a very manual process in terms of making sure that reports are in, that things are collated, that meetings happen, and that the provision is in place. So that the starting bit of that in terms of the assessment and the reporting is quite manual, it's quite person-centred, and with the high level of turnover and what we're expecting people to do, which is, as Amelia says, quite unreasonable in terms of the volume of it, then that links into the insufficiency of provision as well. So some of the complaint is not about the local authority and the assessment process. It is about the lack of provision for those children and the local authority not having ensured that there is provision in place for those children. Well, unfortunately, we sometimes cannot magic up provision that does not exist in a timescale. So Amelia's point about this needing to be a broader issue with the LGO, and as I say, the ADCS are looking at it as well, because there are some expectations from the LGO in the bigger picture, not necessarily in individual cases, but if you look at the bigger picture, that are not pragmatic. We do not have the power, the finances, or the authority to put in place that the LGO things that the LGO thinks we can, basically, in the current situation. So I'm very happy to have another item at scrutiny, but it is a really complex picture with multiple layers and facets to it.
Thank you. I'm conscious that I need to be moving on. But Ruth, did you want to come in, and then I'll just make a suggestion?
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, there's been a lot of conversation about Capita this morning, and I'm wondering, there must be an existing report that's looked at the Capita system with the risks and all the interface that it has with other systems. So I don't know, Scrutiny may not be aware, but Capita also feeds into elements of websites like the local offer, etc. So whether it's worth Scrutiny members seeing a report if it exists, Chair?
Is there such a report, or is that just?
I think there's members of the team have started looking at the risks and benefits of changing the system. I don't think there's something specifically as Ruth has described.
Thank you. Okay, so I was going to make a suggestion. I think rather than me blow many more steam out of my ears this morning, this afternoon, sorry. What I suggest is that I suggest that the committee write a letter to the executive expressing some concerns, and then with the view to at least putting our concerns on record, and then look at, then in the meantime, between now and the next meeting, try and figure out what next with all of this. So I'll review the minutes with our clerk because it's been recorded, so that's saves repeating ourselves again, but with the view to going forward. So the suggestion is that I write to the executive expressing some of our concerns in relation to this. Any objection to that? No. Okay. Heather.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to say I really appreciate that, and I also want to kind of give some assurance. You've been following what the Children's Service have been doing probably longer than I have been. Some of you on this committee, but I've been assured at all kinds of turns that the kind of work that's going on now to map the issues and map the problems, things around EHC production, things around complaints, they're working on really good. But there is this issue that the IT system is integral. So I welcome the fact that you're going to take that step. And I find that really helpful, thank you. Because the prioritisation for limited resource in the council is helpful.
Sorry, just to be clear, this is in no way a criticism of anyone. The point is that we've identified a system flaw, system error, and we need to try and escalate and get that action at the earliest opportunity. That's the bit that I was picking up. Rather, just wanted to make it clear, there's not a criticism of any individuals. It's just this process that we need to deal with. Anything else, members? Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Thank you for the presentation. Thank you for the update. Moving on then, item number 9 of our agenda is the Transform Family View. Gary and Jill, could you turn the microphone on?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm conscious you're a bit behind on your schedule, so we'll try and canter through what we're going to go through with you. And it's really bringing to you a piece of work that we've been involved in, and Jill and I are going to talk that through with you. So I'm Gary Davies. I have historically worked with Bristol City Council and developed a lot of this work, and I've been working with the Department for Education and the Ministry of Housing and Levelling Up over a few years, developing this type of work, and have over the last 12 or 18 months been working with Jill and a really good team in Somerset to develop the type of work that you were already involved in and ambitious with, but we've just tried to take it on to another level. So I'm really just going to better. Thank you. I just asked you to look at this picture, and what I hope you would realise after a short look is that that's a picture of the same child, but different angles. And I'm using that picture to try to reflect the fact that different agencies see children with a slightly different perspective and understand a different part of their life. And what would be helpful is to be able to have a much clearer view of a child's life, to be able to understand it better, but also the context in which that child lives in, with family networks and contextual issues in the community. So what I'm talking to you today about is a single digital view of a child or family, and breaking down the information barriers that have been existing and the issues that people have wrestled with, to give people more confidence to share information across the partnership. So just really, why have a single digital view? And you can obviously read this yourself around early identification of issues, better decision making, resource allocation, monitoring and evaluating, and then also being able to use modern technology, because it's only when you brigade the information in a certain way that you can start to take advantage of some of the things that you've been talking about with Copilot and artificial intelligence and things like that. And this is what that enables as well. And obviously in sharing the information, it's about bringing holistic support, making sure all agencies are operating from the same perspective, being able to bring in timely interventions, quicker identification of risk, and potentially obviously trying to prevent harm, as well as creating a network of vigilance across the agencies who've got responsibility for safeguarding, so there's multiple eyes and ears and people can monitor and understand emerging risk and vulnerability to be able to respond more effectively. And you can see the benefits there that are talked about. And you've been alluding to some of them. It's about breaking down and reducing the retrieval burden of staff having to access multiple systems in order to bring information together. Sitting down, talking to staff and saying, what information do you need to gather rapidly in order to do your job more effectively? And if we can present that information to them at the drop of a touch of a button, then you start to save tens of thousands of hours of low-level admin for operational staff, and makes their work more effectively, as well as improving outcomes for children and families, which is the importance of it. So the context of this really is that it builds on work that Bristol and Somerset have worked together. All of the work that you're going to see that Jill's going to demonstrate to you has been supported by government grants, which we've achieved. And that followed on from Josh McAllister's independent review of children's social care, where he visited, looked at the work and said, look, I think this has got application nationally, and encouraged us to bid for some money. So everything was grant funded. It's been built and implemented in Somerset. It went live earlier this year. It took 11 months to build what you're going to see in a second. And what's obviously nice to be able to tell you is that it was delivered on time to budget and without any cost to Somerset Council. So that's obviously in difficult times, that's a good aspect. And since we've gone live with it, then the feedback has been excellent, and the use of the system is exponentially growing over time. This is a snapshot I took of the user view, and you can see kind of since staff got trained across Somerset in June, July, they started using the system, and it's kind of just growing and growing in its use. So I'll just cover a couple of things. I won't give due time to these issues because they're important issues, but I don't want to spend unnecessary time. But just to reassure you that we have been working at a national level to develop appropriate guidance and templates for information governance. And as a result of that kind of skill and expertise we built up, we've applied those principles to the work that we've done in Somerset. And I chaired a group which involved a number of government departments, the ICO, and various other key bodies to develop this guidance. And we've applied it to the principles of adopting this in Somerset to reassure you that there's kind of robust information governance around it. And also ethics and consultation. So looking at the should we do it, we can do it, but should we do it? And we've talked, we've done some review of ethical principles. We've identified 6 key principles that we want to operate to, and we've engaged in public consultation with the voice of young people and parents. And I know you can't read some of these kind of clouds that have gone up on the slide, and I won't spend more time of it, just to reassure you that we have been speaking to children and young people and parents about what their attitude is towards us using information in this way. And if I was to summarize it in one sentence, they basically said to us, we understand you're going to do this. We don't mind you using our data to support us. We don't want you to use it against us, which is kind of the core element of it. So just my last slide before I hand over to Jill, just to say what is a single digital view. So what it is basically is it's taking information out of existing systems across the partnership. So it's internal council systems, housing system, education systems, youth justice, children's case management systems, but also information for people like the police, Department of Works and Pensions, health, CAMS, hopefully soon probation. And it's automatically extracting that information and embedding it into a data platform, which is then refreshed every day. And then that information is visualized and presented to the staff. It's built on their operational needs. Only authorized people are able to see it. And it's designed for the nature of their work. And there's 2 elements to it, and you'll see the internal version of it. And there's also a partner's view where all schools across Somerset have got access to it and a range of commission providers. And you'll hear a little bit more about that. And lastly, it's the platform for the use of artificial intelligence. So if you want to go on and develop a modern approach to your digital strategy, then the information is being constructed in a way where you can take advantage of that. So that's obviously really helpful.
Gary.
So good afternoon. So I'm Jill Baller. Obviously work for Somerset Council within the children's services, and I've been working alongside Gary, as he's mentioned, to build this single digital view of a child and a family for Somerset, which has been fully funded by the Department for Education. And I've purposely left this front screen up before you think I've got it wrong, just to show you really. So Gary talked about the consultation we've done with young people at the Youth Forum, the Parent Carer Forum. We've done some work with parents as governors to try and understand how they feel about us having a system that pulls together all this different information, consolidates it and then shares it back with our internal children's teams and some of our external trusted partners. And some of the work around that consultation was around our work with the practitioners who would be using the system. So we really needed to understand from social workers, our family intervention workers, our education practitioners, you know, what information do you find it so frustrating that you have to send an email and wait for the response, or that you have to maybe Google something to find out who this services to then reach that person that you need. So all this work was underway, and myself and Gary delivered it right across Somerset to a range of practitioners, including, you know, team managers and strategic leads. We had over 100 user requirements come back for what a system could do for them to help them, as Gary referred to it, reduce this retrieval burden. And one of the things that we were surprised about was actually the level of capabilities around sort of the technology that some of our practitioners did have. You know, absolutely fantastic at working with children. You know, their hearts are in helping those children have those better outcomes and do better, you know, in life. But actually, when you put them in front of a computer and you ask them to do something, you know, maybe, you know, short and snappy on their computer, they did struggle to do that. So the most important thing for us was to build a system that was easily accessible for everybody, no matter what their level of understanding in IT was. So just very quickly, the system is accessed either through our Power BI apps, and some of you won't even know that this little button here is an app launcher. So when you hit that little button there, you get an app launcher, and there you have the system that we're talking about, built ready for people to use, Transform Family View. We've got another way you can go into systems and you can scroll down here and you can simply access it like that. So our internal practitioners have no reason not to be able to access the system that we've built for them. So this is the system itself. It's built in Power BI. So the Power BI is the visualization part. Gary talked about all the different data streams that comes in from spreadsheets to joined up system overnight into Azure Data Lake. And from that, we tell it what we want to look at. So Gary's talked about data protection, hugely important that we protect this sensitive information. So every time you log on, there's a reminder about this sensitive information and how we protect it. Once you've agreed to that, you get a very simple search page. Pretty much, if you can buy something on Amazon, you can use this system. You can put in just one initial, or you can put in the full surname or partials. Absolutely click to lock it in. So that is part of the Microsoft Power BI function. Then you put in anything you know about the surname. You click the search, and anybody with those names who we have within our system, so thinking about our capital education system, our LCS, our partner systems, if there's vulnerabilities in the system, then they will show in here. You select the individual that you're looking for because you've got the date of birth there to the right hand side, so you can work out that that is the child you're looking for, and then you view the individual. Obviously, there's a huge training package that comes wrapped around this, and I can't thank really the children's services teams enough for the support that they gave us in helping us understand what we needed to build, helping us display it in a way that they would be able to use it effectively to support children, and also, you know, the team managers and leaders for promoting it and helping and freeing up the practitioners to give us that time to build it. So this is the first overview page. A couple of things just to mention here. The practitioners told us they didn't want lots of different systems to have to log in and out of. So we've built this here, contextual launch buttons, so they will go directly into LCS, our children's case management systems. If you are a social worker or a family intervention practitioner, you have access now to CIDR, which is our Somerset Integrated Digital Electronic Record. So that's our joined up digital health record. So rather than understanding and thinking about what health information needs to come into the system, we've given practitioners the ability to go in and self-serve their own data. So the young person that they're looking at in this system will link them into CIDR if they have those permissions. So that was, you know, quite groundbreaking for Somerset to do that. We've got a quick snapshot of some personal details. This is what practitioners told us they needed on the front page, especially things like the designated safeguarding lead in schools. Some flags, so where the vulnerabilities, the assessments, and where there's been involvements, thinking about suspensions and exclusions, these are all here, clearly orange for current and grey for historic, and you can drill down into those further down, and I'll show you that later. Timeline of involvements, and just a quick summary of what's happened to that child within the last 12 months. That's what practitioners said they needed, that quick snapshot, what's happened in the last 12 months. Then we look at a contacts page. Our social care practitioners were quite clear that they wanted the sort of social care early help involvement separated out from that other involvement, because sometimes there can be lots of different practitioners within social care and early help, not in relation to kind of step up, step downs, but other other elements of support that they pull in. So actually keeping that other involvement separately, such as a parent family support advisor in the school or CAMS, and would make it stand out more in that bottom right hand corner. And those contact details, interesting, you know, obviously you can directly email through the system, but our front door were telling us that phone numbers are really important to practitioners as well. So if they're arranging strategy meetings really quickly, they might just need the phone number. So things that we hadn't really thought of, so we built that into the system as well. Got a family tabs page here, and I'm going to rattle through this quite quickly now, but try and understand not just the household, but who else is influential on the child's life, who lives not within that household, but is also obviously having an impact. And then you can open up and look at the individuals within those households, and then you can start to select different individuals. So perhaps if Lily Test is spending a fair amount of time with her aunt and uncle at that address, you can actually have a look at the vulnerabilities that we hold within the system from the partnership across there, and you can see obviously that there's drug and alcohol issues, adult offending and domestic incident. So actually you probably think that might not be quite the place where Lily should be spending so much time. So that's how you can understand the wider context of the system. The timeline's really helpful for understanding, you know, the interdependencies around the support that the young persons have. And, you know, we've got the key there, but we've also got tooltips to clearly show, you know, when they were open, when they were closed, and you can see how they kind of interact with each other. The education page is really detailed. We worked alongside Bristol with some funding from something called a Data Accelerator Programme, and we put a practitioner into a school in Bristol and Somerset to understand the information that flows in and out of schools and where those gaps are and how we can kind of fill that gap with some of this information and some of the support. So these are some of the things we've learned from in that. And then the final page is just around the involvements and the timeline of things that have happened in Lily's life. So I'm going to stop with my demo. It was a very quick demo, and I do understand that. So if you did want to have a separate longer discussion around how we've built it and what it can show, we're really happy to do that. So you'll be pleased to know I jumped through all these slides. Then my last couple of slides really was just talking about partners. So Gary mentioned that internally we've got one system. We have the same system for our external trusted partners, but it's minimised. So information that comes through that social workers, our family intervention workers can see in more detail is minimised when we go out to a partners view. Thinking about partners, we're thinking about our schools, CAMS, so our Somerset Foundation Trust CAMS workers, some of our voluntary community sector, they've got access, they also share data with us, but obviously using, you know, our robust information governance wrapped around it. So safer recruitment, DBS, training, you know, it all happens. I think we've got over 1,000 external users currently, and we only rolled out the system externally in August, so it's been a tremendous amount of work. I'm exhausted, Gary's exhausted. And then I wanted to share some feedback really. So this is our emergency duty team. So they obviously take calls from the public and partners who are worried about children. They work out of hours. So there's not always colleagues that they can draw on and talk to. So this was an interesting one where there had been a report of a young person who had been abducted, and calls from the police to the address were failed that the child lived there. So having looked on the Transform system, it was also pulling other addresses that the education system had because our episodes were closed. So therefore on LCS, it was showing a different address, which is often the case. So they managed to find that address, send the police there, and although it was a hoax call, the girl was safe and well. But it just goes to show how sometimes, you know, when a system's closed and other systems then have updated information, to have it all in one place is absolutely crucial to safeguard children. And then finally, doing all this work, we heard and we talked and we unpicked and discovered that our practitioners were not often as confident as they could be in relation to the sharing of information. So if there was a serious risk of harm, they were fair, they were clear. But when you start to think about early help and prevention, they weren't very confident. So we worked across with our Somerset Safeguarding Children's Partnership for the last 12 months, and we've put together a whole toolkit to support practitioners, and we've done some podcasts, and Gary's done a talking head, and we're starting to look at the way we use our legal basis around sharing to help practitioners become more confident. So I think we're going to stop.
So first of all, personal comment. One of the first things that we talked about at the first ever committee that I chaired was data sharing and the problem with data sharing. So seeing this, I imagine there are some people in the service that are skipping around because it potentially has the potential to answer so many questions. So first of all, thank you. And the fact that it's come like this, just an initial look. So the first thing I'm going to suggest is that it would be reasonable, and this is for Jamie, to I think all members need to see this, because it's that most of them may not realise what they're seeing, but we still need to. So a members briefing would be a good way to do that, and just so that's the first one. And thank you. Thank you to the team. Thank you everyone. So if it's as exciting as it looks, then I think it's pivotal. I noticed that you talked about because one of the questions I was going to ask is we've invented a wheel. Are we sharing that knowledge? So, but I see that you've linked in with some other people beforehand. But I suppose the one question that I need to understand, there's some really pivotal partners there. And one of the problems that was always chucked at me when I said about data sharing was the identification of the young person because on one system it's one number, on another system it's a name, on another system it's another number. I'm assuming you've got over that so that the information is there.
To some extent, it still is a challenge. So we have to write quite clever coding to merge records. And there is always a risk that if the data on one system is different, because the date of birth is different or something, we won't match the records. But we are working with the Department for Education on a project which the government are pushing forward, which is a single unique identifier for children. And they're looking to pilot that in possibly April next year. We've got a workshop on it next week. And we're helping to shape that pilot as to how it could be used by sharing this type of identifier. I have been thinking about whether to use the NHS number, but it isn't confirmed yet.
So you're working through that. That's fantastic, because that was always the issue that was there, and I'll say it out loud. Right? So obviously for data protection, you use an example name there in the system that you showed us, which is good, and it looks like it's meeting a lot of the issues that were always problems, because one of the things that we as a committee have always been shouting out for, that you, in an ideal world, a child or parent would only have to say their story once, or at least limited, rather than have to repeat it. And this is one of the things that will overcome. I'll sit quietly for my excitement for a second and bring in some of the other members. So Francis.
I'd say everything you said. For years we've been sitting here. Jill, I talked to you for years and years and years about this. And can we use the NHS number? Can we not? This is great. It's absolutely fantastic. I had a couple of things that were going through my mind. One, you've already answered. You're connected up with the LCS, the social care system. That was a key one. But second one is, I think, and I hope, that then this needs to be very much in people's minds when we think about the procurement of a replacement for capita, because let's not that one go separate. And the third one is the question, and it looks like your work is done. I'm sure it won't be entirely done, but the feedback has been really good. The take up is really good. I was just a little surprised today to get the paper to look at for the decision as to how we're going to use what used to be troubled families, which is where this came from, money for between 25 and 27. And there's 1.2 million in there